Warning, this podcast contains scenes of explicit nonsense and lore.
Previously on the Resident Evil podcast.
Enemies do what the plot requires them to do in order to make the situation work.
It might be the most fucking stupid movie I've ever seen. It's really pretty though.
There's a moment at the end now, after she's listed all the various weapons and whatnot, there's a sigh and you can actually physically feel her soul leaving her body. It's incredible.
So the person named Neptune considers the act with the giant shark in it to be one of the worst things that came out of Resident Evil. Yes!
The Resident Evil Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 90. That's right, where the best laid plans of mice and men, and certainly podcast planning, often go ganger fillet. I'm Nick, better known as Neptune. Let's see who's joining us today. He's trained his Alfred to bring him some morning tea, Veronica Virus. It's TheBatMan.
Hello.
He's had more variants than Dead Chris colleagues. It's STARS TyranT.
Greetings.
And finally, his film genre may still be as popular as ever, but is he? It's Rombie.
Hello.
Coming up on this podcast, we will be reviewing Separate Ways. That's right, it has been released, much to fanfare, and a surprise announcement, quite frankly. It's one of the most anticipated DLCs in all of Resident Evil, now out, of course, in its remake guise. So we'll be going through that with a fine-tooth comb, bringing you our review. We'll also be catching up on the news before ending with another quiz. So let's start with the news. First up in the news, Death Island Blu-ray and DVD is now out in the UK, although no UHD, which is a bit of a pain if you wanted to watch this in 4K HDR like myself. Don't know why you can't get it in the UK, it seems a bit of a miss. But you can order it from Amazon Spain. There you go, a little tip for UK listeners out there. You can get it at a relatively cheap price from Amazon Spain, which I will be doing shortly. Listeners of the podcast will know that sadly Batman was not able to join us for the Death Island review, but he is with us today. So John, you can give us your taste and review of Death Island. I know you've been eager, chomping at the bit. What did you think of this latest CGI film?
Yes, it's just as well I missed it because I didn't like Death Island, unfortunately. The whole thing just felt rushed and very phoned in. I watched it and my first reaction was, well, this just stinks of Capcom saying, right, we're going to finally do something with all the core cast in this Avengers style, and the rest of it simply doesn't matter. You know, the presence of Chris, Jill, Leon, Claire, and Rebecca all in this at the same time will guarantee success. That, you know, the rest of it is just completely irrelevant. The plot, such as it was, could have been written on the back of a cereal packet. You know, it was just like bad fan fiction. I know this is Resident Evil and everything comes with a healthy dose of cheese. So I wasn't expecting Scorsese, but come on, we can do better than this. The villain, Dylan, is probably one of the weakest we've had in a very long time, and given the declining quality of Resident Evil villains, that is saying something. And the third act was basically just a big photo opportunity for the heroes to pose and fire off large guns and look cool. I did like some of it. You know, the Jill and Leon stuff was really good and probably, you know, as good as everyone was hoping for. The action sequences were actually really well done. I enjoyed the liquor sequence and Leon's fight with Maria, but I just simply didn't really care about what was going on. You know, there was zero tension and nothing memorable about any of it. I got more from Vendetta than this. And even Infinite Darkness, for all the criticism that gets, at least that tried to tell a proper story. And it actually had a bit of drama and character conflict in it. You know, Dylan's motivations about going against the status quo and targeting the core cast simply because they work for the establishment who are the real villains, it just didn't work for me. You know, if you're going to put the core casting together with all the plot armor they've got, you really do need a very formidable villain, and this just wasn't it. yes, it's nice to see them all together after this time, but it was just a shame it was in such a weak story. And that's basically all I've got to say. I'll buy it for collection's sake. I'll probably watch it again at some point, but it really is really low down the list for me in terms of Resident Evil media, I'm sorry to say.
No, I shared your views, but certainly Act 3 I thought was woeful, quite frankly. There are some nice bits. I could have done with a bit more explanation about Maria myself, but
I am surprised how well it's gone down. Obviously people are really happy to see all the core cast together, which is great, but I'll be interested to see what people think, a year down the line when the dust has settled and the next project's announced. I think people will have a big change of heart about this, because I really do feel it was rushed and it was pointless and it was very, very weak.
Well, on that, I mean, I will already say that in how many months has it been? 2-3 months now?
yeah.
I'm already starting to reappraise my feelings on it, I'll be honest. I've rewatched a couple of bits, and obviously, I did the bulk of the edit for the actual review podcast, so I rewatched a lot of it to source clips and things like that. And I was already finding through that process a lack of care. Whereas people are going to roll their eyes for me at this, but I've actually found parts of Resident Evil 6, of all things, have actually improved over the years, and we've always talked about the character interactions and whatnot, and I actually think they still hold up even all these years later, because I think the actual writing within those individual moments is actually quite good, whereas I think Death Island's writing is so formulaic and cheap that already the initial charm of seeing Leon and Jill together is lost, because the writing doesn't match the event, whereas when Chris and Sherry meet each other in RE6, it's a big moment, and the writing complements it quite well. And this just, once the sort of glamour wears off of seeing these characters together, I genuinely wonder whether it is it even on an action sort of scale, possibly even worse than Vendetta? I don't know, because it's just so overblown and feels about nothing, because Dylan gives you no dramatic tension to enjoy. Yeah, it's already not sitting right with me as I reappraise it. I think everyone's just so, as you say, John, just dazzled by the communion of characters that we've never seen before, that you kind of look past the flaws. And
yeah,
I don't even know how I feel about it now, to be honest. It's interesting when you scrutinize it on a technical, on a movie making level. It has little to no merit, and that's the biggest problem. And I think it was Alex in our last podcast, alluded to the fact that as a sequel, if you think we'll take Infinite Darkness out of this equation because it's a separate thing. And as much as we treat it as a movie in a sense, it wasn't sold as one, so we'll just negate it. But in terms of the movies, if they come back and do any kind of CGI movie follow up, it's got to top what Death Island's done, because that's just by the nature of movies and sequels. And I just don't know where they go after Death Island. What do they do next? Do they just go even bigger and have Carlos in it next time, and
Smash Brothers Ultimate
with a linear launcher just to save the day at the 11th hour and say, Leon, my good friend? It just and then it just gets so unearned, because it's just so much, so extra, isn't it?
I just don't understand why they can't be tied into the games more. Why can't we just have a film that, it can be standalone, but it can serve as a proper prequel to the next game. It can introduce some characters that might feature in Resident Evil 9. They did a Mass Effect animation, which was set between Mass Effect 2 and 3, and it was a standalone story, but it was obviously canonical, and it gave you hints as to what was going to happen next. It had characters making cameo appearances from the games, things I don't understand why Capcom seem to have this obsession with making these films completely standalone. We've talked on the Discord about the ending of Village with the conflict with Chris and the BSAA. That sort of situation, in my mind, would be better resolved in a film rather than a game, because we've said we'd struggle to create some kind of horror experience when the scenario is political one, so to speak, with Chris and the BSAA using BOWs. That sort of conflict could be better told in a film, and I don't understand why Capcom won't go down that route, because 90% of the people who've played Village are going to watch that film, and vice versa. It's not going to be a completely new audience. People are going to know what the film is talking about, regardless of whether or not they've played Village. I just don't understand why, Capcom won't do that. We had a prequel to Resident Evil 6, but it was a manga comic. Why couldn't it have been a film? I just don't get it. Remember, Damnation came out something like 6 weeks before Resident Evil 6 dropped. And when they initially announced it, it was all about BOWs in an Eastern European war zone. So we all thought, oh yeah, this is going to be a prequel to 6. And it turned out to be completely unrelated. And if you listen to the supplemental material on the DVD, when they talk about the use of Ada, the makers of Damnation were like, well, we had to be careful with what we do with Ada because we don't know what she's doing in Resident Evil 6. There's just a complete lack of communication. Yeah. And I just don't understand the politics behind it all. I know there's rights issues and whatnot, but it's still all owned by Capcom at the end of the day. And you've got people who are involved with the games, executive producing these films. So I just don't understand why they can't be more tied together. What's the point in creating someone like Dylan Blake and going back to Umbrella and Raccoon City again? Why not just have someone from the Connections? Something that's relevant to what's going on with the games now. Yes, fair enough, they might not be as popular as Umbrella and Spencer and Wesker, but I think it would just keep people's interest a bit more.
I agree. I think there's better opportunities to integrate.
I still maintain the ending to Infinite Darkness with Leon and Claire and that conflict they have over the data on that chip is some of the best stuff in the entire series.
Yeah, it gets to the heart of a lot of the, with the US government basically being a baddie.
Yeah, and you could really understand Leon's turmoil with not giving that data to Claire, and Claire's utter disgust and sadness that he won't do it, given that she thought they were really good friends. It's that sort of stuff I wish they would do more of. Whereas Death Island was just completely superficial, like, the Pierce reference. Yes, it was nice to have a Pierce reference, but are we honestly thinking Chris has never discussed Pierce with Jill before? Frustrating.
Mobile gaming news. The newly announced iPhone 15 Pro and iPhone 15 Pro Max will be able to somehow, through the magic of technology, play Resident Evil Village and Resident Evil 4 Remake on them. Seemingly natively, but I'll be amazed if that is possible.
Native. It's at 30 FPS they've confirmed, but
that is incredible.
That's not bad for your hand, is it?
It's absolutely incredible, and I've seen some of the screenshots they've released showing how the control. I mean, it looks absolutely brilliant, but horrendous at the same. The thought of playing a game on like that, I don't. It doesn't even.
Yeah, I mean the image they've shared of is it RE4 Remake with all the controls overlaid on the screen is. Good luck doing your platinum run on that one is all I'll say, because that doesn't look fun. But you can plug in the controller and enjoy it just the same. Or, connect controller, should I say. I remember us all being dazzled in 2005 when they announced the original RE1 on the DS.
Yes.
And that came out the following year. And, it seemed preposterous that you were finally playing a console game on the level of RE1 in the palm of your hand.
I won't be ever picking up an iPhone, but we'll keep an eye on reviews to see how well it goes down when the games are launched.
The only thing I will say is that this is promising for the Switch 2 or whatever the Switch's successor is, because obviously the Switch was based around like essentially mobile technologies and whatnot. It is struggling now. The Switch it's being humbled a lot by a lot of modern game experiences and things. And if Nintendo have, got their priorities right, if it can even get close to what like the iPhone, whatever it is, iPhone 15 is doing,
15, yeah.
Then, you could have a very promising device on your hands there that can play all the modern Resident Evil experiences, and hopefully all the past Switch back catalogue will carry along with it too, and you might actually have a handheld that can play most of the series then.
Infinite Darkness news. Oh yes, we can't escape. Issue 3. What's interesting is that everything seems to be a little delayed. We should be very close to the release of the trade paperback, which was scheduled for September 2023. But at the time of recording, I don't think we're anywhere near that. I had heard rumours that it's been pushed back to March 2024, which is certainly the version I would be getting. But John, I think you have read it, John. I think you...
Yeah, I've read it, and it's nothing special, to be honest. It's even 3 issues in, it's not really fully revealed what's going on. It seems to revolve around a cult or an organization that basically think the world is too overpopulated. So they're trying to basically kill off large groups of people by detonating bombs with the T-virus in it. And I think, or I'm assuming, they're affiliated with Senator Wilson's people from the film, because people are then wanting to move in and test the inhibitor that was featured in the film. But again, it's very, very vague. It's basically just Leon running around various different crime scenes and trying to predict where the next bomb is going to go off. The artwork is really, really nice, but so far it's completely standalone. There's no other characters from Infinite Darkness in it. There's no other characters from the wider universe. There's no real references to any other games. That's all there is to it. It's people who haven't got it yet. You're probably best off waiting for the trade paperback, because there's nothing really much has happened so far. All the hospitals are aware of the T-virus and have countermeasures in place if there's any kind of outbreak, which was kind of gives you a neat little detail on how, you know, the world has progressed since everyone's been able to get hold of the T-virus ever since Wesker put it on the black market. But quite negative on tonight's episode, but yeah, it's not really worth your time.
Oh, well, we'll have to keep an eye. I don't think there's been release dates yet for issues 4 and 5, and in my experience, once issue 5 comes out, it's only a matter of weeks since the trade paperback, so we'll keep an eye on that. Moving over to site news. What's that noise? Oh my gosh! Oh my god! That is, yes, your non-canon alarm has gone off because we have some non-canon site news. I'm very excited. Oh yes, someone has to be. So that will be me. Non-canon corner on the REP website has been dramatically updated with a little side endeavour that I've been completing. The non-canon encyclopedia is now up, and this is a showcase of just a few games that fall under that category, and we've got by BOWs, we've got profiles, locations, and some viruses as well for you to explore. Games that are covered so far: Resident Evil Gaiden, Confidential Report, 4D Executor, and Resistance, which of course is from Remake 3. So there's some articles on that for you to enjoy. But yeah, that's quite cool. So that's a big update on the website. I hope everyone's been looking at them.
I was going to say, Nick, is this your magnum opus you finally unleashed upon the internet? Is this the culmination of all your works?
It will be updated with more things as I go along. So I plan to do some articles on things from the drama albums and maybe some other mobile games where there's something a bit meatier than just a couple of lines. But
how much did it excite you to finally write an article on Tyler Hamilton?
Enormously. Very, yeah. Just as a word, though, I mean, what I will say, a lot of it is, I don't say conjecture, because that's slightly unfair. A lot of it is putting dots together, and if you've ever read some of my editorials as well that kind of cover a lot of these games, there's a little bit of filling in some of the gaps, because these games and things like 4D Executor don't always have dates or anything like that. So
you've done some embellishment here.
Yes, embellishment. So like 4D Executor, in order for me to make it work, I have it on right at the end of the outbreak. There's some evidence to suggest that's the case, and then I personally have it so that, you know, the nuke, the bomb kills Dr. Cameron. That's the end of it. So it all fits nicely in a little bow. You know, things like Confidential Report, which has no reference to dates, times, location, anything other than a couple of names. You know, I've put in those dates, but I'll make that clear in the, you know, in the editorial. So do not take any of it as gospel. It's just my take on when things happen. So it says, like, you know, on the 28th of September, Tyler meets up with Naomi and blah, 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 blah. I like to make it work within my own headcanon. So some good stuff in there. Bits about the Cameron virus, and again a couple of theories on the Cameron virus as well that I've kind of put in those articles, because it's but I've tried to be a bit vague on some. You know, I've said, like, you know, it's unclear as to precisely what happened, but the interesting thing about the Cameron virus and Dr. Monster Cameron, if you want to call it that, is that there's kind of there's two offshoots from the boss that, you know, that they fight in the food warehouse. You kind of got one strand that goes from the boss to the cockroach to the rat to the bird to the tyrant, and then the other offshoot goes from the boss to the dog to Roger to Dr. Cameron. So there's two, and that can be that's often forgotten. But so there's two different strands. The only lingering question I always have is whether the bug, the roach, bird, rat line, whether that is also Dr. Cameron. I've concluded no. So yes, plenty to look out for, and there'll be more articles added in the next, as soon as I can, whilst I'm working on another project as well. The alarm has come to an end because we return to the much happier world of canonical work, and additional site news comes from TheBatMan, and we've got two new updates in the lore room. Firstly, from Biohazard Revelations 2, we've got the untold story of Barry Burton's V2 Samurai Edge. That is now up, and that's a recent translation that tells a bit of gun lore. Everyone likes a bit of gun lore about the history of Quint creating the new Samurai Edge that Barry uses in the game. And we also have Angela's Diary, which is a kind of prequel document to Biohazard Degeneration, which George mentioned earlier, which is really cool. It's like a in-universe letters and diary, if you like, prior to the events of the Harvardville incident. So that's her, investigating or trying to find her brother Curtis, and then concerns about Ron Davis. And that's a really good little read, just to kind of get you in the bit of back position on the Harvardville SRT team. So, John, good work, my friend. Do you want to talk about the Samurai Edge story? Because not many people would have known about that.
Yeah, I mean, it just continues Tokyo Maru's, impressive collaboration with Capcom in terms of adding extra lore alongside all this technical jargon that comes with these guns they keep releasing. There's not a lot to this one, except obviously has a little post RE5 Jill reference, which until Death Island was the last time she was actually mentioned in the canon. Barry basically emails her to ask to have a look at the Samurai Edge A1, which he has in Revelations. And is impressed enough with that for Jill to put him in touch with Quint, who is also from Revelations, who now works at the technology office at the BSAA Europe branch in London. And basically Barry goes to visit Quint there, and Quint basically creates this new gun for him. But he makes a cock up at first because Barry asks him to design a new gun, and Quint basically creates a new gun based on Barry when he was in his prime as a STARS member, and not how he is in the present day when he's in his early 50s. So he basically has to redesign the gun to take into account Barry's current age and physicality. And yeah, it's set prior to him going off to the island to rescue his daughter. So it's just a nice little bit of supplemental material that brings back a couple of the older characters. And then Angela's Diary, as you say, is it's about her investigation into what's really happening with Will Farmer. And obviously she's looking for a brother who keeps one step ahead of her, really, because he's basically using false aliases and meeting secretly with Frederick Downing in hotels to plan the Harvardville attack. So yeah, it's a good read. It sets the stage nicely for the film. So yeah, I would recommend having next time you fancy a watch of Degeneration, have a read of that first.
You've got some more coming out over the next couple of months, which will of course keep you updated on. But some Resident Evil 5, Biohazard 5 lore, which should be good.
Yeah, I mean, as you all know, I'm currently reworking the timeline for the next version, streamlining it a lot, obviously adding all the new stuff. And I've basically gone through it from start to finish and redone every single translation, which is where these new lore documents are coming from. I'm basically going through them all as we go. I've got loads of others that have been redone, like the original Trevor's letters, the deleted Trevor's letters from the true story behind Biohazard, and obviously the Resident Evil 5 BSA desktop observation diaries, things like that. So I will be adding stuff to the lore room in due course, and then it'll all be available on the new timeline, which I'll hopefully get out early next year.
So, well, that does conclude the news. We now turn our attentions to why you have listened to this podcast, our review of Resident Evil 4 Remake, Separate Ways.
he wants me to retrieve the amber. An object of ill omen. What terrible actions will be done in its name, and who will pay its dark cost? Because in this world, someone always pays. Best not to ask who or why. I understood that. Made my peace with it. Until that one night in Raccoon City changed everything.
After a content drop, Separate Ways was released to the world to much excitement, and for good reason. Rewind, the release of the original game, critically lauded, but criticised for a lack of story. With the release of the PlayStation 2 version of the original game, came the reprieve in the form of Separate Ways, a feature-length additional chapter from the mysterious Ada Wong that provided the world with more gameplay, more Wesker, and more storyline. With the absence of Separate Ways in Remake 4, its DLC was inevitable. And with such a loved origin, it can be said that this reworked chapter has been the most anticipated add-on in a Biohazard of all time. With how we say mixed feelings on the base game, how will this new add-on be received by the team? So let's find out. Firstly, we're going to do, as we like to do with our reviews, a kind of brief overview from the team as to how they found Separate Ways. As I mentioned there, it kind of came thick and fast. We weren't really expecting it, but we've all played it. We've all completed it. Batman, let's start with you. How did you find Separate Ways?
I very much enjoyed it, I'm pleased to say. Just as a refresher for people, I was probably the most positive out of all of us in regards to the base game. I thought the remake of Resident Evil 4 was excellent for the most part, and I'm pleased that Separate Ways is the perfect bookend as well. I was impressed with how long it was. It took me a good 5 hours to complete on my first run through. I was impressed with how in-depth it was. An even larger role now for Lewis. Obviously, great to see Wesker back. Surprising that he was so present in the story. I must admit, I wasn't expecting him to be present in the village itself. I'm not sure how I still feel about that, but I was definitely pleased to see more of him. And it just felt like its own self-contained story. If you play the original Separate Ways, it's very bare bones. There's not really a lot going on outside a couple of new cutscenes. It just felt like it existed to show Leon's story from a different perspective, whereas Separate Ways in the remake feels like its own story. This is definitely Ada's story, and if anything, the few cutscenes where Leon is present from the main game just feels like a bit of a distraction, really. So very pleased, very in-depth, and it's definitely something I will revisit on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, I agree. Lot longer than perhaps we all expected. STARS TyranT, what about you? How did you find Separate Ways?
Separate Ways in the remake is a very good product. It's probably a better version of Separate Ways as a concept. The other one was a bit of an asset flip and a sort of piecemeal piece of content. That, as much as it was my, the highlight I took from the original version of Resident Evil 4, was quite scrappy in how it was assembled. This is a much more complete experience. It helps that it was obviously built from the ground up. All the people who were outraged that there was missing content in the base game from the original will find a lot of that content has been reworked and included here, which is very welcome. The value for money is absolutely exceptional for what you get, I think. And it's a very good product, and it feels like the concept that was thought up like all those years ago back in 2005 has finally been realised to its fullest potential. It feels truly like the game's B scenario, Leon A, Ada B, kind of thing. So it's a very good product.
Rombie, what about you?
I'm in a mixed bag, but I think everything has been said is exactly what I agree with. I think from a value of the content to like the B-side scenario, it actually feels like that fits mostly much better. I have issues with the Wesker thing on the island, but at least he's more involved, which is kind of cool in its own way. Like, I agree with all these, but my inherent issue is that I burnt myself out on the main game a bit because I'd really dropped off on my interest in it, and then I was like, right, cool, I'm going to take a break right just before this dropped, and so it made me getting into it a lot harder, and it took me a while to kind of find the time and the motivation. That said, once I got past that personal issue, I was quite pleasantly surprised I think my only real foibles outside of a couple of little plot things, which I'm sure we'll get to, is just the fact that I'm not sure if it needed the same level of like merchant upgrade system things, but I know that the caveat for that is that then it's not so much value for money, because it would have been a very straightforward narrative if all you got was your guns and that was it. So I can see why those exist, but it does make part of that be the padding, obviously, when you have to upgrade things and scour for things to collect for the merchant, just like the main game. And I think I perhaps could have done without that in the Ada story, but again, yeah, I kind of accept. So yeah, generally positive though.
I agree as well. I think it is a very good product, like we've all said. I think if you like Resident Evil 4, the base game, you're going to really like this. It's more of the same. And for someone who really struggled with the base game, actually getting through it, I found it really hard. A welcome relief on standard mode. Ada's a lot more well equipped going into battle, and she seems to be a lot more capable with firearms right off the bat. And I didn't have too many issues throughout the game. I didn't really suffer for the moments where most of the base game I was on like one herb or whatnot. This time I think it was quite plentiful in terms of ammunition, but also in terms of health. But this is standard mode, so I can't comment on anything else. But just by comparison, I found it a little bit easier, a bit more forgiving. But that was good for me because I didn't really fancy another one of those playthroughs of RE4 again. So I welcomed the kind of change of difficulty from my point of view. Interesting point there, Rob, about the merchant. It does add a bit of padding, doesn't it? You're quite right. But I think it's one of those things that really helps flesh out, like the idea that he's there and helping every people, because he mentions in some of the cutscenes, I've saved this one for you, as opposed to Leon. I found that quite a nice little touch. And I don't think you can ever get to where he is in Leon's game, and vice versa. I don't think Leon can get to where he is in Ada's game. He's always at different points in the village or the castle or whatnot.
Mostly, yeah.
Mostly. Yeah. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the new enemies, and we'll come to some of them. And I much preferred the cohesive narrative. This was, as John said a moment ago, this was very much kind of Ada's storyline and a B scenario. What I will say is it puts Remake 2 to shame. It really does. It makes you lament what could and perhaps should have been for Remake 2, which we all know the kind of B scenarios for Remake 2 is simply the same game, one different cutscene, and the ending. That's basically it, and a couple of rework puzzles. This was a proper, full-on, adventure, new areas, different perspectives, and it kept you on your toes. You didn't quite know what was going to happen as you went through. So I really liked it. The general caveat is that I'm still relatively of the opinion that this is a bit too action orientated for my liking. But for little DLCs and little side-on games like this, I give it a bit more of a pass. Let's not pretend for a moment that Hunk's fourth survivor is anything but all non-stop action. But it's an important part of Resident Evil 2, the original at least, in terms of the storyline. I don't mind that because it's not it's not supposed to be the survival horror element. So I come at it with a slightly different mindset that this isn't the main campaign, this isn't the main story, it's a supplemental piece of gameplay. So it can have a little bit more fun with it, and I'm glad it did. So let's talk about some of the new gameplay elements, because you are literally thrown into this after an interesting opening where Lewis and Ada are basically auditioning for Strictly Come Dancing. We come straight into a boss battle, which harkened me back to the days of Resident Evil 3, playing that for the first time, and suddenly being faced with a boss right at the beginning of the game. It was certainly a shocking moment. But interesting gameplay elements brought onto the table with this this new version of U3.
As a boss battle experience, I was a bit underwhelmed. I didn't really get any enjoyment out of it, and it obviously links into this new subplot of Ada being infected throughout the first half of her campaign, which again, I thought was a little bit pointless because it doesn't really add anything, because ultimately we know she's going to be fine. But a lot of people have compared this boss battle to having vibes from Resident Evil 3.5, which I can sort of get. We've got the hallucination mechanic, which, Sean said earlier, is from Revelations 1, more or less. Interesting, but a bit underwhelming for me.
Did you enjoy the idea of it? Because he was essentially I say stalker villain, not quite, but, you face him multiple times. Persistent, yeah. Did you? I got quite bored of him. What about you, Sean?
It didn't really work for me, to be honest. I found it messed the pacing up quite early on. Every time he sort of just turned up, he felt a bit bullet spongy. I did only play on standard, and I'm sure it's even more of a chore on the harder difficulties. But I think they repeat the trick a bit too much, if you like. And I have massive issues with the Ada infection subplot. Because I feel certainly with the case of it being a remake, there's no dramatic tension when you know Ada's going to be fine. This was a bit sort of what we said about Death Island, was we knew everybody was going to be fine when they got infected, because the trailers had already showed later events where everyone's there. So when you put in these sequences of characters being infected, you know they're going to be okay. Because either this game takes place in a point in the timeline where you know they're going to be there for subsequent events. And when you do something like that, it negates any drama, any tension. And so the only thing that I wonder the entire plot was added for was the moment where Wesker gets a blood sample from her.
Yeah, that's where I thought it was going.
Wesker makes his, spoilers, physical appearance in this game's narrative. That is the only reason I can think they added the Ada infection subplot, because they certainly didn't do it for any kind of drama or tension. There's not a single person who sat there going, fucking hell, I hope she's all right.
This was going to be my counterpoint to your thing, Sean, and not in a bad way. Like, I 100% agree with you. My counterpoint is that you can definitely have someone infected for dramatic tension, but it's got to be the point. It's got to be about either the story or the thing that they go through or the situation, right? So you look at, say, something like the situation in Resident Evil 3, where, like, inevitably we know now, if you were to play Resident Evil 3 now, you know Jill's okay because you play subsequent games, but it becomes a much more interesting plot point for other bits related to her getting infected. So you've add some dramatic tension or interest from the circumstances. Whereas, the Ada thing doesn't add anything narratively other than what it needed to do to make a plot point for something that we don't actually have a resolve to, so therefore there's no tension in it. And so it's not necessarily bad that someone gets infected or something happens to them, even if you know they're going to survive. It's just more about what you're actually trying to achieve. And this is the thing, I think we've all said this about the infection thing seems relatively scripted and forced for a particular reason.
I think the problem with doing it with Ada as well is that she's such a femme fatale character, whether it's the original version or the original version of the character or the remake version of the character, where she is sort of, typically stoic and doesn't let a lot of her emotions be challenged. I've said before, like, one of my favourite bits in Resident Evil 6 is where they do actually almost peel back that layer of Ada and you see the real woman within. I don't really feel at any point in Remake 4 we got to see the real Ada. And so because of that, you're not privy to how she's genuinely feeling.
Yeah. 100%.
Because every time Separate Ways makes you think you're going to get that moment, U3 turns up again and she has to just sort of get her shit together and deal with it.
Yeah. 100%. Or Wesker turns up and rescues her and then berates her and she gets all kind of pissy about it. It's kind of funny. I was thinking the same exact thing. And the other part of it is her character is so, like, I know it sounds weird, but she's so slippery to get out of things that it's very rare for her to make a mistake that gets into the situation in the first place, narratively speaking, as a character type. So it's very rare when you get those opportunities, and yet, the few times they potentially had, they squandered. So, I 100% agree with that.
Humorous nitpick as well, the fact that a cutscene actually depicts her clothing ripped, and then for the rest of the campaign, it's actually intact, where she gets infected in her arm. It's just a silly nitpick.
I did notice that too. I did.
Obviously shops at the same store as Ethan.
I think Passanta would have worked better as a more traditional stalker enemy, maybe just for that one level of the castle rather than randomly turning up in the village. And I think they missed a trick with it, really, because if the Passanta creature did work in a manner similar to Mr. X, and Ada's infection allowed Passanta to obviously sense where she was, because that's how she finds her. The medication that Lewis gives her that knocks the parasite out. That would have been a nice gameplay mechanic, I think, to sort of throw her off your scent, so Ada could walk freely around the castle.
I saw something on Twitter with the infection storyline, which I thought was bound to happen, was the fact that when Leon removes the parasite from Ashley and they take it out, there's clues on the screen to suggest that it's already been used beforehand, and I thought, oh, that's a really good subtle nod, and I thought that's where it was going.
I think most people did, yeah. Because it's the same
to do
day.
That. Same day, and it would have been, she's
yeah.
used it. And so it's a bit disappointing that all she took was the medicine and she kind of then, puked it up. And I was like, oh, is that it? Okay.
That was exactly going to be my question, Nick. It's so funny. Because I was like, hang on, wait, she just coughed it up? And she's fine now? This seems like a pretty anticlimactic. I was expecting that, but not even in the sense that I had seen that tweet. I just think narratively wasn't that the point that was the way you got rid of it? And so all of a sudden she just takes this medication and she managed to cough it up? Well,
there's a file that says it's intrinsically linked to U3's life. So once U3 expires, then all of its parasites released die with it.
I must have missed that, but also that's still dumb.
I don't think it was a parasite in the typical sense. I don't think it was a Plaga she was infected with. It was something, intrinsically linked to the U3. And once U3 died, that died within her. So it didn't really surprise me that she didn't use Lewis's machine.
But it feels more like a plot device infection.
Exactly what I was about to say.
Gameplay than actual lore.
Why did we need to make it that if that's the case, you could have just done this with the parasite thing instead and just not had it linked, and then it would have been, again, going back to this whole dramatic tension thing. Yes, it's not going to add much, but it's more interesting. Her just coughing it up and it's linked to it is a dumb idea, and it doesn't endear me to it. Now I know that's in a file, I'm almost more pissed off.
I wasn't a huge. I thought it was going to lead to Wesker basically capturing her in a kind of Krauser role, and then perhaps she was going to be infected, perhaps more violently.
That would have been. I'm sorry, actually, Nick, you saying that would have been way more interesting. That near the end, she's there's a fight and she wins, but she passes out, and that's when Wesker came in and saved her and took her to the Plaga chair. And he ends up being the one that activates the machine to try and save her. That would have been way more interesting.
And then she's like, "Oh, what happened to the U3 monster?" And he's just like, "Don't worry about it."
Yeah, it came back. She thought she defeated it. He kills it, saves her, puts her on the chair, saves her. That would make the narrative between her and Wesker a much more interesting dynamic. And there, I would be her being infected would be a much more cooler thing to have that situation happen. Who cares about Who cares about tension and the infection? It's setting up a narrative point of Wesker actually came in and saved her. He did do that in the main game, but it kind of seemed throwaway. When it was that important, that would be a huge difference. This is a life or death, infection.
Yeah, a bit of a missed but it just adds to the list of main characters that have now been infected in the entire series. So that's pretty much everyone now. Has had an infection.
The cynical person could say it's another female character that's got infected, so she can retain her eternal youth.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh no.
Whereas poor Chris, by the time he's 60, he's going to be surrounded by all similar aged peers that look 20. He's going to be all greyed and old. Because I think every main female character in the series now has had some infection of some point.
Yeah.
Of the lead ladies.
I want to add also the caveat that Leon has also retained his relatively youthful looks.
We had the Plaga in him for a bit, didn't
he? Exactly, yeah.
Oh dear. There were, we talked about some of the kind of gameplay elements there with some of the hallucinations and things like that. There's quite a few new things added here, so we can come back to perhaps some of the hallucinations if you like a bit later. But Ada now seems to have super duper contact lenses, and
sorry, what was that?
Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure if Wesker could see from them. I
don't think so. No,
I don't think we're quite at that level. But it was, that was the justification for hitting the R1 button for the grappling gun. She's kind of seeing it, and then of course later using the footprints to follow people, which was used okay. I mean,
It's very Batman Arkham.
Yes, it is. Yes. What did everyone think of that kind of new element?
No.
No.
What did I surprise?
The thing is, I'm always happy to have Resident Evil have. There's a phrase, isn't there, that the technology within a property can exist from 5 minutes in the future. And Resident Evil has always felt like it's had an aspect of that when you've had linear launchers made in 1983 and things. I don't mind certain aspects of it, but when we're talking about full HD screens that are contact lenses or cybernetic eye, it doesn't really go into any real detail what the iris is. But this sort of it amuses me that we've had 2 remakes with Ada in, and she's had technology which far exceeds the setting, I feel. With the spy device that she had in Remake 2.
She did. Oh, yes.
Devices through walls and hack them remotely and things like that. It feels like an extension of that. And in terms of a gameplay thing, it's scripted to a fault. It would almost have been nice if they'd used it as a Genesis scanner, where you could hit the iris at any time and use it to find items or something.
That would have been an interesting way to find
things. Just feels cheap to me. It just feels like another way they can just slow the pacing down a little bit and pad.
That would have been an interesting way to find treasure rather than having the maps from the merchant. Was that you scan for the treasures in this mode, and they get marked on your map when you're in the area for looking around.
Yeah, because it's scripted to a fault, it just falls flat for me. And on repeat playthroughs, it's just going to be a thing you've got to do.
Yeah, well, especially the footprint thing. I don't mind the marker for the grappling, because obviously that's telling you, distance wise on it, you get close. Which, I mean, from a gameplay perspective, this is the problem, I guess. If you take away the footprint thing, which is obviously added to just make more interesting, at the first playthrough, an interesting gameplay diversion. But what, as Sean just quickly and correctly said, was that it's going to become annoying on repeat playthroughs. Whereas the grappling thing, I'm kind of like, you have to have a marker for that somehow. So I guess in the universe it makes sense for the fact that they've given her this tech. I can see the complaint. I don't mind personally. At the end of the day, I mean, there's a difference between plot conveniences and gameplay conveniences. And while I definitely agree with Sean's thing that perhaps it feels a little bit too futuristic, this is also the franchise that once they did Remake of 2 had technology even within the umbrella bases that was way ahead of its time, flat screens, all that stuff. So I think we have to bear the idea that things are also made of their time, including remakes that compared to the original. Obviously, if you were doing the original, you never would have had flat panels in 1997, 98 because they didn't exist. Now you're retroactively doing it, you might chuck something in to make something look more futuristic in its time period.
Yeah, I didn't really mind it for the most part. I didn't really see what it brought to the table, in the sense that, unless I'm forgetting something, the only thing it did was show her where the cigarettes were so she could get Lewis's radio frequency.
And the footprints for the puzzle with
it shows her which way Lewis escaped the castle and things like that, to the point where it shows you where his handprints were.
Yeah, but the game's so linear. Do you really need that?
Yeah, I mean, for the puzzle one, it made sense because you were trying to figure out which order someone went to, but you could do that puzzle in a different way somehow anyway if you wanted to.
Explain why she was so, stoic throughout the main game, but I don't think he was watching her through that.
He was obviously tracking her, but not watching her, because he obviously knew exactly where she was when she passed out, and he's there, so... But that's the other part I kind of wanted to get to, and now I'm preemptively saying is it makes it feel like he was following her the whole time. Like anytime we didn't see him in the ship, he's back on the island watching her. He's doing to her what she was doing to Leon. So it's almost like she's in there looking at Leon through her scan thing, and then he's up on the hill behind her watching her doing that.
How did you guys honestly feel about the hook shot shenanigans in this? Because if you go back to the original Separate Ways, the hook shot is mainly just used for her to gain ground, whereas in this she's fucking swinging around El Gigante like I'm playing Marvel's Spider-Man on the PS4. She's literally... It feels like the funny thing is, like in RE6, that kind of stuff was accepted because the game that surrounded that sort of stuff was so outlandish and bonkers anyway that it just kind of fit within that. But I find it really, really interesting that Remake 4, on the most part, is a grounded version of this tale, and yet you've got Ada going absolutely mad. I mean, the hookshot stuff she does in this is just it's superhuman. Like, even Spider-Man can't do the stunts that she can do in this.
I'm kind of on the Nick side of this, that I kind of go it's action packed and gave it a little bit more leeway.
I also thought the gameplay. I absolutely love like the ranged melee attacks and stuff like that. When I'm playing
Yeah.
Mercs, I'm all for it because Ada plays fantastically well in Mercs. But
Yeah,
I'm just talking about it more from a tone point of view.
Well, that's where I'm going with this. It's the same
Okay.
thing tonally, isn't it? Like from a narrative standpoint, if you're accepting that on the gameplay perspective, you kind of have to accept it on the cutscene perspective. Otherwise, you'll end up complaining that it's disjointed, that she can do stuff in the cutscenes she can't do in the gameplay, or she can do stuff in the gameplay that
Yeah, that's
she
fair.
should have done in the cutscene. I mean, I love the thing that one of the things they added, which it's a shame that it's a perk, but one of the
the
case
shield.
trinkets is the shield pull that you can do with, and I'm like, oh my god. This is a game changer. Like, I was like, holy crap, this is so good that I can just rip a shield off someone rather than having to like shoot their feet or head. And I was having fun doing that. I was like,
yes, equip it immediately if you haven't tried it, people. Because the gameplay loop for Ada is a lot of fun because of the hook shot, the way it's worked into the melee and stuff.
Knock down multiple enemies with a melee kick, like it's just fun. Like,
she is ridiculously fun in Mercs.
I also have to say, as someone who got very bored of El Gigante in the original game, I think across both the remake and this, they managed El Gigante in a much more interesting way. So even because obviously you got the first boss battle in Leon's, by the lake. Then you've kind of got him as the cave troll around the turrets, and then you've got the two in the lava room or whatnot. But they remove some of the other ones, and this is what's brought into this game, I suppose. That boss battle that they kind of skipped in the original. I know you didn't like it as much, and I thought it was quite an interesting take. In that it's the same as Leon's battle, but you could go that little bit higher. Whereas in the original, El Gigante would destroy all the buildings and throw them at you. This is a case of you going on top of the buildings, and then I actually thought I'm usually not very praiseworthy of boss battles across all the remakes because I feel they think gameplay first, boss second. I think in this one, because they were always going to have the hook shot as part of it because that's part of Ada's character. I actually thought it felt a lot more organic in that idea construction. If you know what I mean, it felt tonally like yes, this is what she would be doing to get out of the way, get the higher ground, and then I was firing off quite a lot of the with the crossbow at the and using the idea that aiming for the exposed Plaga. It's tricky. It's a hard boss fight actually, but I actually thought it was quite good, and that was my favourite one.
To be clear, like in terms of a gameplay experience, it's wonderful. It's a very clever way of remixing the El Gigante fight. I was just more like approaching it from a question of tone. The fact that the main campaign is grounded and gritty, and then we've got acrobatic Spider-Man in the DLC. But you three have made it apparent that this is possibly a nitpick.
I can totally see it too, because in certain things you would just be like it's a tonal inconsistent or whatever. And what I was saying is consistency to its own DLC narrative, but as you correctly also point out. But also, as you correctly point out at the same time, and it's fair too, that this has been much more of a grounded, realistic take in some respects. There's less, goofy one-liners and silly stuff. So all of a sudden, to have this, it is a bit of a tonal change, even if it is somewhat true to the character. It's not true to the game. So I get it too. I hadn't
considered it in that respect, really being true to Ada and who she is. That's fair.
In regards to that boss fight, though, the thing that's really frustrating is that you're all correct in this to me, in the sense that, like, I think it was a very clever boss fight. I enjoyed it. It was cool to see this massive destruction, this whole farm area. But then, because there was all the fights in the game, and I had, much like you, Nick, I'd kind of been burnt out on them. I was like, this is a much cooler idea. I wish I'd had this rather than some of the other ones. And of course, my first reaction was like, oh no, not another El Gigante fight. And I'm like, and even though I enjoyed the dynamics of it, I still was just like, oh god, I'm sick of these.
Well, I had that. I had that feeling on U3. I thought certainly the village boss bit.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought was a bit cheap because I don't mind the hallucinations. I don't mind multiple ones. They kind of done it before. I just got a little bit pissed off that seemingly the ghost versions of him could hurt me, and that really annoyed me. And I was like, "What is this?"
That's actually gone further than the Revelations fight as well, because Norman's hallucinations couldn't hurt you in Revelations.
But I guess the idea is that at the end of the day, these are hallucinations that are embedded to a physical connection to you, i.e., the thing that's in you. So when it is mentally attacking you as much as it is physically attacking you, it can still injure you, I guess, is the
body
narrative
cannot live without the mind.
Yeah, kind of conceit. So
Yeah, it's-
but
it's
it
the
is
baby,
annoying.
isn't it?
And that's it. The baby connection. Yeah, but that's all I can think really in that sense.
But I like the visuals of him in terms of in terms of the world that they created.
Purple fire that surrounds everything is a cool touch.
Yeah, and it also has a connection to the other, when you see bits of like the grayed out thing that you see from the main parasite as well, it points to. So because that happens to Ada as well when she gets infected, and a few other times you get flashes of that too. So it's all obviously connected in this. So obviously it proves that like even this creature is still connected to the hive mind concept too. So
I really enjoyed that fight too. And the first time I did it, I was very, very low on ammo. So by the time I'd killed him, he had pretty much destroyed the whole farm. I think only literally just the windmill was left standing, I think.
That's the only miss trick I feel that they had with the game, is that there would have been an amazing moment if Leon had gone back through the farm in the main campaign, seen the entire place has been fucking leveled, and he's just like, what's gone on here? And then that would have obviously led to a lot of people going, oh, that's going to be for Ada's campaign, surely.
Yeah, I think
something I always enjoyed doing in Remake 4 was using the stealth mechanic. As I really enjoyed it as an addition. It didn't get used as much as I would have liked. Obviously, you can tailor your own ways of sneaking about, but it's only a matter of time in most encounters in the original that that's the end of that. I used it quite a lot in this game. I think the game gives lots of smaller mini boss battles, not boss battles, but encounters. There'll be like I'm thinking of the island, for example, as you're kind of going through all the lasers and the guns and bit. There's little kind of areas that you can do a bit of sneaking. Alarm goes off, and then they all come, kill them, and then you go the next bit, and then you can plan your attack like that. And I found I used stealth loads in this, and so that really helped me enjoy the process a lot more.
Yeah, I think I took out entire rooms with stealth, certainly in the castle. And it helps that Ada's a lot more nimble. She's a lot faster.
Yeah, and what's quite good is that you're not always sure which ones you can get, because some are hiding quite well. Some of the Ganados and whatnot are hiding quite well, but perhaps a few deaths and you can kind of come back. So in the castle there are a lot of places you could implement the stealth tactic, and I found myself prioritizing the repair of the knife a lot, something I didn't actually do that much in the original game. I think only ever repaired it once or twice, whereas this time as soon as it needed repairing, I was an old merchant getting that done because I used it so often. And I think the stealth kind of added a little bit to the femme fatale sneaky mission type scenario, head canning a little bit, trying to make it my own little take on it. I think that was quite good. But I did use the hook shot quite a lot to get out of areas. Sometimes I was like, oh, I'm running. It's like and then hoping that there's a hook I can grab out there. I think is it the end of the castle where there's loads of catapults coming off at you? I think towards the end there's loads, and I was just absolutely bombing it through, and I wasn't even stopping. It was like, hook shot out of there. Next bit, next turret. Let's get out of here.
Control, do you copy?
I'm listening. Go on.
We ran into some unexpected trouble.
And? What will you do about it?
Louise is already en route to the church. I'm tracking him every step of the way.
Very well. Then I suggest you hurry.
Copy.
That's where I need to go.
Stick to the high ground. You have the means.
I will say, though, after playing the main campaign quite extensively, and obviously separate ways recently, I never want to see a game where I have to fucking smash boxes en masse to get supplies ever again. Because my god, what a fucking chore that is in this game.
Oh my god.
Let's just have them available on shelves, Jesus.
It's like Pablo Picasso visited Spain and then just decided to paint everywhere. It is. You're right. It's utterly nonsense.
I don't actually mind the fact that they're marked. It's just the fact that I find it a fucking chore when you go into a new room and there's 3 barrels and 4 boxes all in different locations that all have to be, routinely smashed before you can pick up the items. Just put the items on the floor or the shelves. it's one thing that The Last of Us, or as its nearest example I can think of, does really well, is that the item picking up is extremely quick. On subsequent replay throughs, it was the same in the original. To be fair, having to get the fucking knife out every time, but there's got to be a better way of doing it than this. It's so slow.
When you were playing, I wonder where I should go. The game doesn't even give you an opportunity to actually need to peruse the map or think about where you've got to go next, because there will be some ledge or half ladder that's painted yellow just for you to go, that's where I need to go. There's just no skill in it at all.
And I suppose one of the things that the iris actually does to its detriment is it actually gives, because most of the areas, certainly as the bit you described, Nick, where you were escaping the catapults and whatnot, the iris actually shows you where the final hookshot thing is to get out of each area.
Yeah.
So once it flags up, it's almost like the Resident Evil 6 objective marker, and as long as you bomb for that, you know that you're pretty much good to get out of the room. I don't think I did. You're right, actually. Thinking about it now, you've mentioned it. I don't think I checked the map once in separate ways, because you don't really need to, because of the way the game sort of funnels you through. It is certainly a lot more linear and driven, but then I suppose it matches Ada's mission as such. She is a lot more driven with mission objectives and things.
And the original was super linear as well, to be fair.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I spent my time only really looking at the map to look for the treasures. That was basically it.
Ada herself was, I feel, better integrated into this game, and we've kind of briefly spoken about, even in the original separate ways, outside of perhaps a few cutscenes, it didn't really gel as well as perhaps it could. And I think, if memory serves me well, it doesn't, even in the original, it doesn't quite work out if you play it through. I think some of the scenes don't quite match up, but this one was a lot more seamlessly integrated, should we say.
Well, it just helps that it was all obviously built in tandem with the main campaign this time.
Yes, yeah, and it just felt that nicer. It's like some of the cutscenes, Ada there, and it almost wants you to go back and play the main campaign, and then flip on photo mode during the cutscene if you can, and then see if Ada is standing there. Obviously, she won't be, but it's like, okay.
If she is, if she always was, then bravo, Capcom. That's absolutely incredible. If you can actually go back to those moments in the main campaign and see her, then I'll do something outlandish.
Spoiler alert: you can't.
You've tried. Have you tried?
Well, I played through sort of the first half looking for the little clues, and there's nothing there. Like Lewis's cigarettes are not on the shelf, for example.
Oh, no, you're breaking my heart.
And the little sort of grappling hook thing in the castle's not there and stuff, but they're just little things.
Because that is one of the great bits about RE6, isn't it? When you can see Ada in the distance on the crane and stuff like that, and when you're playing as Sherry, it's really cool.
Yeah. But I like the fact that there was more interaction with Leon, in the sense that she was just outside when he's battling Salazar and things like that, and you can kind of, if you stay around, you can hear him having Salazar's rabbiting on about whatnot, and I liked all that.
Yeah, my favourite little touch like that was that it's such a ridiculous one, is that when you're at the church, if you go climb, when you walk back up on the roof and you walk to, you can hear Ashley crying.
I missed that. Yeah, I saw someone put that on Twitter. I never thought to even look.
Yeah, you can't see it, but you can hear it when you're up on the roof.
So what I think a lot of people have spoken about online since Separate Ways came out is almost like Ada didn't get a lot of lines in the original game, and you see basically all of Ada's lines in Separate Ways again. They repeat some of the same cutscenes. This really does flesh out Ada's storyline as one would expect, and I've seen a lot of commentary about almost like redemption for Lily. As a voice actress, which I find an odd thing to say necessarily. It wasn't that she was ever particularly bad. It's just that in the main campaign, it's just that she didn't have anything to say.
She didn't get given much, yeah. And the dialogue she did get, was often vague.
It was,
anyway.
and this really, I think this helps. Separate Ways really help. In terms of what she says to Leon. It flows a lot better, and I thought Lily did a really good job with it.
What people need to appreciate is it's an entirely revised version of the character. Lily Gow's Ada is not trying to be the sultry, sexy Sally Carhill in a very, very silly ball dress in closing fall or autumn Spain where she'd be freezing. It is a much more grounded, stoic take, and Lily's performance reflects that.
Yeah.
She's not trying to be alluring in any way or anything like that. She's a professional in this, and that's the fundamental difference.
And I thought it matched Remake 2 relatively well, at least in terms of what we see. I mean, in Remake 2, she's not a lot like original RE2 Ada, in my opinion. She's very, very cold. I think is probably the best term towards Leon in the encounters. Leon's like this kind of like puppy dog, but whereas in I suppose he's always been a bit like that, but in the original he's kind of, you can see that she cares by the end actually, whereas in Remake 2 she's a little bit like
I'll shout out Sonny on this one. He actually called this one out on our Discord the other day, that he quite likes the inversion in Remake 4, that actually at times Ada tries to almost win Leon over, and he's the one not interested this time because he's sort of more professionally closed off through his training and whatnot, which I think is a neat flip on the original and a nice observation, yeah, because he really, really doesn't trust her in this.
No, he doesn't.
And it's very apparent he's almost not interested now.
Talking of Spider-Man...
Yeah, that's one of the... No, go on.
Talking of Spider-Man, was it a Spider-Man Family Guy reference? You always get one or something like that came up. There's I don't know. Yeah, it was a deep cut if it was.
I don't know what you're talking about, Nick.
In Family Guy, there's a Spider-Man meme where you always get one life saved by Spider-Man, and in this, she says something very, very... Or am I thinking?
I think just following on from what Sean said, that's one of the things I do miss about the original Resident Evil 4 is the relationship between Leon and Ada is a bit frigid in this. I mean, Sonny's point is correct. Leon's very standoffish with Ada in this, but likewise, she doesn't seem to care as much about Leon as she does in the original Resident Evil 4. And she's not as calculating in this either. Like in the original, it was Ada who made sure Leon was there to save Ashley so she could use him as a distraction to help her complete a mission, things like that. Whereas in this version, she had no idea Leon was going to be sent to rescue Ashley. He's not part of her plan in this. And I kind of miss...
Yeah, she just utilizes it while he's there, but didn't organize it in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd miss all that kind of calculating, forward planning aspect to her character. It's the same with Wesker, talking about the ending to the original game. In the original Resident Evil 4, Ada knew exactly what she was doing. She had every move thought out. And I just find it really strange that once she gets the Plaga, she then says to Wesker, well, what are you going to do with it? And he's going to basically commit genocide. She's like, oh shit, well, I'm not going to give you it then. I think the original Ada would have been a lot more switched on as to what Wesker was going to do. That's in no way Lily's fault. I've said plenty of times, I just think the character of Ada is just written all wrong for these remakes.
And I absolutely agree. From a personal point of view, this Ada doesn't work for me. And I come off the attitude that Ada was one of my favourite characters in the OG timeline, and still is. I think I'm long bored of this merry dance with her now. Not knowing her true motives and who she truly works for, and having a more stoic, even more difficult version of the character to dissect and break down is just frustrating now. I don't find it tantalizing or interesting like we used to speculate 15, 20 years ago. I just sort of shrug now and go, well, yeah, she's just doing whatever, isn't she?
Because the character hasn't greatly moved on, and 6 is a good exemplification of that. For example, where they had good opportunity to kind of, and you've said this before, Sean, too, to dig into the character a lot more, and you feel like it's heading that way, especially considering she's so important to the plot with the whole Carla thing, and then all of a sudden by the end she's just back to being her usual self.
Yeah.
And you're did she change? Did we learn much about her? Not really.
And this is the fundamental problem I have with the whole remake saga we're going through. And this is obviously a discussion for either later in the podcast or obviously our Remake Reflections podcast coming up. But Ada worked as a character, I feel, in the original games because there was the mystery that surrounded her. And that mystery could be expanded and ran for many, many years. Newsflash, it was run for many, many years, and we never got answers. And in going back to 2 and 4, her initial appearances, to still not get any answers, to not take that opportunity, to not even like in Remake 4's case of taking that opportunity to fix a couple of weird continuity issues like giant pharmaceutical company S. I just find it frustrating. I just feel like we're retreading ground that, you know, we particularly on the podcast, and I know a lot of our listeners, we've already been here. So retreading this ground again, I just find maddening. You know, I can't go on a forum and or a Discord and just chew up like Ada's motives and everything because they've not massively changed still. And that's what's so frustrating. It's like these remakes are completely botching their attempt at their opportunity to maybe start to peel back some layers of Ada and reveal more about her. They're just literally retreading the same beats, telling them slightly differently, yes, but still ultimately leaving us going, who does she fucking work for? Like, do we still not know this after 25 years?
I was about to say we don't actually find anything out, and the more we got from Remake 2 and Remake 4, it does seemingly suggest that I'm not sure she worked for anyone. Was she just almost like she's being played as a mercenary that's just very good at her job?
Yeah, I mean, she refers to Wesker as a client, doesn't she? And she obviously he mentions that he pays her, and she wants more money for blowing up the island and stuff. It seems like they've simplified it a lot. You know, I've mentioned previously how they got rid of the Umbrella revival subplot because ultimately in the lore we know it never really went anywhere. It was just quite randomly abandoned in favour of Ouroboros, and the introduction of Blue Umbrella in Resident Evil 7 kind of made the whole Wesker wanting to revive Umbrella thing redundant anyway. And they seem to have done the same here with the whole loyalty to the organisation subplot. It's frustrating for us as, you know, veteran fans because this was sort of one of the hanging plot points from 15 years ago that, you know, we still talk about to this day. And Remake 4 seems to have simplified it and got rid of it completely. Again, probably because it was never ever followed up on. You know, in this remake, that loyalty sort of test between Ada and Wesker still exists, but for Ada, it's a much more personal one. She doesn't seem to be following orders this time round. She simply betrays Wesker because of her own personal moral reasons. And she does mention in a monologue after Chapter 1 that, you know, beforehand she was just a spy who would do the job no matter how bad the job was, no matter, you know, how many people got hurt, she would just do it and not ask any questions. But then she says, you know, her experience in Raccoon City completely changed that. And I think that goes a long way as to why she ultimately decides not to give Wesker the amber. Again, I'm disappointed they've got rid of the whole organisation subplot because it really adds to the politics and the world building. But I can kind of understand why they've done it because ultimately it never really went anywhere.
I think that's cute, and with the benefit of hindsight, it's easy for Capcom to strip out the ideas that they can maybe look back on 20 years later and have a second chance at revising. But I just personally find it a little bit insulting to all the work that's gone into all the grand lore and everything. And I know people could argue, you know, well, as John, you rightly say, that this plot point didn't go anywhere, the Umbrella revival didn't go anywhere. But what people need to appreciate, if you weren't there, you know, back in 2005 and whatnot when all this was kicking off, this was the lore, this was the glue, the politics and the background storylines that was in the supplementary material was the glue that held this series together in the worst times. You know, when you know, like the games were falling apart because they weren't very good, like Resident Evil 6s, and your Operation Raccoon Cities were being forced down us, and even to some extent like the Chronicles games. And I know a lot of people like Resident Evil 5 didn't land for certain people, and we always had like the background lore, you know, these grand mysteries, and I just I don't know, I feel it's more than a shame. I almost feel it's an insult on those original plot threads. I appreciate they didn't go anywhere, but that's sometimes what a mystery is. And to just sort of simply for people to come along now and just say, well, they didn't work, so they can go. It's just simplifying the story. And the problem is when you simplify something like Resident Evil, when you strip it of all its politics and its mysteries, Resident Evil storylines are a bit silly. Yeah. They sometimes need the subtext that exists beneath. They need the files. They need those details. Because if you just take the games at face value, president's daughter kidnapped by insane cult, and action hero Leon Kennedy goes to island and saves her, it's a bit silly, isn't it? It's a bit Hollywood. It was the details and the rich politics of the organizations and the shady corporations that make this Resident Evil. And if you strip all that away, what does it become?
I fundamentally agree, but I guess in the context of this, I kind of see why, because of what, where we've said it went nowhere. So when you've got a chance to remake it, it's probably the first time actually of all these remakes where I really think they've made an adjustment that kind of made sense given what happened next anyway, and perhaps where they want to push this narrative should they continue to remake other games. Because the Umbrella thing, I feel, was a knee-jerk reaction to the knee-jerk reaction of the fact that they killed off Umbrella and everyone reacted negatively to it. Because the time, much like you said, Sean, the time, you've got to put it in the context of the time, and the time was Resident Evil 4 came out and they killed off Umbrella in the opening line of dialogue, basically. And then everyone went, whoa, what? Hang on, how did that happen? What's going on? And then obviously internally they went, oh, maybe we overcorrected by going down the route of like just axing Umbrella. And so we're like, oh, we could create a new Umbrella to replace the Umbrella, and it's Wesker's intent. And so there was this thought there, but then it was never really thought out. And then when they got to the next game, they went, oh, actually that wasn't quite what we wanted to do.
And that is a fundamental issue with the original version of RE4. Is like like you say, they axe Umbrella in the opening cutscene, but then by the end of the same fucking game, they're promising Umbrella going to be back in a new guise.
Yeah, and I think that we never committed to it, and that's it.
And as a result of that botched storytelling approach, we had to, as a fan base, endure like what has been a 15-year course correct. And I kind of lived through it. I've done it now. We've all collectively done it, and I'm not really interested. We've sort of lived through it, and it's gone. It's done. I'm not really interested in them adding additional plasters over the bullet wound.
Well, I think the fundamental difference here, I don't know if I agree with the 15-year thing, because I think fundamentally the whole retroactive replacement of that happened by 4 years later in Resident Evil 5. That's really when it was corrected. If you're saying it was 15 years past that point, I think that's a bit egregious. I think it was clear within 4 years that they had changed that plan. It's a kind of a weird place to be, because do you fundamentally say they did want to remake 5, and we'll probably touch on this near the end of the conversation. I'm sure Nick's going to bring this up. But if you'd remake 5 now, you would end up with the same disconnect when it's a clear disconnect. So if you remove it now and don't make it obvious, and you do go remake 5, it's going to flow better, because now you've got the hindsight. You've got the retrospective concept of where the narrative actually ended up going. So it seems better just to remove the extraneous part now. It's tough. I get it. I do agree with you fundamentally, but I'm also like, this is the first time in these remakes where I feel like maybe they actually took the opportunity to remake things sensibly, i.e. separate ways actually feels like a B scenario, whereas the B scenario Resident Evil 2 didn't, like Nick mentioned earlier. And now you're talking about fixing something that would create a better character, get better continuity of narrative, and now we're arguing not to take that out. I'm like, we can't have it both ways, man. We can't have it both ways.
I'm going to throw a couple of spanners into the works there before bringing in John, because I'm sure he'll have a comment or two. The cohesiveness is a really important point. 3 letters, HCF, which is an interesting point. Bringing them into RE7 still is one of the most random things that they've ever done. So it'd be interesting to see what happens to that in the future, if anything. But also, it Remake 2, my memory may be a little hazy. I don't think we ever had confirmation that Ada was working for Wesker in Resident Evil 2.
We did through Wesker's report.
Yeah. But
what are you talking about? That remake or original?
Remake. Purely from a remake. If we look at a remake timeline,
yes, but then I guess we've gone with the assumption that it's the same as the original until said otherwise, because it hasn't been said. If that makes sense.
No, I agree. Yeah. I agree entirely. My point is that the moment, because there's 2 phases of Wesker, if you like, in the OG timeline, if you want to call it that. There's the I'm collecting every virus and parasite under the sun Wesker. Then there's Manacle Wesker when he meets up with Spencer, and there's been a couple of conversations about this, and this kind of change. It's just interesting that you've got a more consistent Wesker, perhaps in this one where he's collecting a Plaga and is also Manacle and world God delusional, if you want to call it that. But I just wonder whether we're ever going to see, and this could relate to a Code Veronica remake. God's sake, I hate all this. Are we going to see, Virus collecting Wesker? Because, as I said, because we don't have direct confirmation in the remake timeline that he was after the G virus. I just wonder if they're going to completely narrow it, really simplify Wesker.
It's possible, but then it's possible they will just explain that. Who knows? We won't know until we know. That's the simplest answer, isn't it? Like,
well, that's the thing. I thought
narratively, it would make sense because you've already just shown him collecting the Plaga stuff. So if you go back in the timeline 5 years, 6 years, then you're going to expect him to be doing the same thing with the viruses. And so if they did do a Code Veronica remake, we expect the outcome is the same. He's there to get the virus, and will likely end up with exactly the same circumstances that the original had, more or less. So I don't know, Nick. There's no way to answer that question because we don't know.
There isn't. John, what's your thoughts?
Well, I don't think you've got out to worry about there, Nick. I think Remake 2 was made on the supposition that, Wesker was going to have his behind-the-scenes role with Ada that he had in the original timeline. There is a scene in Remake 2 where she's speaking to someone on the radio, but the voice is garbled, and 99.9% of the fan base were like, yeah, that's Wesker. But going back to Separate Ways, purely coming at it from a lore perspective, I think the remakes have dropped the ball in terms of being able to expand on the original storylines, because we know there's so much supplemental material already out there that's been written and rubber stamped for years that doesn't appear in these games. And your case in point where you mentioned HCF there, that's probably one of the biggest, because they do play a big role behind the scenes in Resident Evil 2. If Capcom are going to remake Code Veronica, they play a big role in that. And obviously they play a big role in Resident Evil 4 as well. And whilst I understand they've simplified the plot by making Ada's betrayal of Wesker a more personal decision, it's disappointing that Capcom have chosen the easy route of jettisoning these subplots when they could have expanded on them. They could have told us who HCF are, thrown in some files about, Wesker's history with them, and, really set up events for the next game, whether it's going to be a sequel to the mainline series or a remake of one of the older ones. It's disappointing that, like Sean keeps saying, we keep retreading old ground, but we're not getting any new answers. We're just getting different twists on the same events.
I think that's the thing across the board with the remakes, which we've talked about, that you had this opportunity even to create a more cohesive continuity, and there doesn't even seem that has even been followed, let alone being able to put more detail into it. And that's slightly disappointing too. Like, we've already talked about the disconnect between 2 and 3 in some respects. That could have been a lot more closer. So it's kind of, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that it's more simplified and things don't connect as well. The fact that Separate Ways connects as well to the main story is why we're all shocked by it.
Yeah, and like we say, it's far better integrated than the original version of Separate Ways ever was.
I'd say we will be doing a kind of deep dive, if you like, into the overall remakes, as as we are up to number 4 by now. In our next podcast, which will be, this has almost been like a little bit of a teaser, I suppose, as to the type of conversations I think we're going to be having.
Yep, I'm going to have a horrible time. Thank you.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, I'm afraid you might have a little horrible time.
Get the beers ready, Sean. Get the beers ready.
The remake train has very much left the marshalling yard. So
does it exist in this version?
I was going to say, Nick, that's a poor one. That fucking hell.
Give us the marshalling yard. Oh, dear.
It's on its way to the dead factory.
Drama's left the nest.
Tell you what, though, this is probably a nice little way to segue it back into RE4. So there was a very, very amusing piece of art that came out many, many years ago, not long after Remake 2 came out, and it was a cross section of rural Spain. And it was the Remake 4 map, and it was it started with like village, castle, and then there was another thing on the top of a mountain, and then there was a massive fucking long elevator down into
mines. There was the mines, I think.
It was mines, and then we go into El Nesto. Well, as I'll shout out Mish, because he liked to taunt me this one, Mish for you. They kind of did El Nesto, didn't they, in Separate Ways, because Ada goes to a very much dedicated bioweapon testing facility with laser walls.
Yes, I wanted to come to that.
Basically, your nest, isn't it? That is El Nesto.
It did pop into my head when I arrived. I have to.
They
admit.
actually did it, the bastards. And
Just-
it even
at least
takes,
I did-
it's not a lift, but you have to go on a lengthy cable car journey to get there.
Yeah.
It's its own dedicated facility. And have I read somewhere that there is actually Umbrella branded equipment in there? So it is El Nesto.
All but name. I remember saying, John was telling me as I was getting to this point, the island's greatly expanded. And I think that was a really good addition to Separate Ways. I'd be interested to hear everyone's thoughts though on let's just call it El Nesto for the sake of it.
I think that's a good thing. Let's just call it that. Yeah.
It was such a good integration that I didn't even realise we'd gone to an entirely new location until the game sort of implied that we needed to get back to the main island. It was like, oh shit, yeah, well, the cable car has actually taken us away, hasn't it?
Yeah, very Lost-esque, wasn't it? We've got to go back. And it's like, what? No, we can't go back. But yeah, it was the removal of the lasers from the main campaign, the removal of it, and it caused a bit of unfair criticism. It wasn't exactly like the base game was short. I would say the original game was probably a tad too long, so I welcomed in the original the slightly narrowing of some of the chapters. But here, of course, we got them back. And I suppose the lasers were there for the new BOW, I think, because there's the file that suggests the only way to kill it is through lasers. So I assume they were installed as almost like a guard / safety net in case.
Yeah, I think it implies directly that actually
to
keep it in place.
And what was his? Is it Martineau or something?
Yes.
This was a weird segue that the Separate Ways did.
Martinico.
Martina, there we go. Yeah, and you don't really get a massive good look at it because it's it's a kind of like
you can look at them. You can look at the model and the.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, so if you
an odd addition, no.
You found it odd. Explain.
Well, it just felt out of place compared to like the other monsters in the game, which and this just felt like a traditional Resident Evil BOW, something that I'd see in Zero or something, as opposed to something derived from like a parasite infecting. It just felt like it was so far away from the other mutations in Resident Evil.
I was going to say that, but then I was thinking about El Gigante, and I'm like, it kind of feels in that vein somewhat, at least. Like it's a weird giant mutation. So while it wasn't completely consistent, there was some thought in that sometimes something else happens with the parasite. So otherwise, how do you explain El Gigante, for example? So I don't know.
Well, all I can say is that I hope somewhere out there, Colin Salmon, you listen to the podcast and know that finally you've had your moment in the games because something has been dispatched by a grid laser at last.
Yeah, I guess that was the bit that was really on the nose. I mean, the original laser hallway was already an allusion to the film, but this one was much like the Umbrella Zen thing, was very on nose.
Yeah. Well, even it forms more or less the same grid, I think, doesn't it? But even like the editing and the way it's done, the way you see it passes through the
and then holds,
and then cuts away at the last second, and this was I don't know whether people would care to admit it, but this was a Paul Anderson homage.
Another one to the list.
yeah, Nick, you're gonna have to redo your video, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Well, you can add in the ORC one I pointed out to you that you missed. So
I did,
if you do redo it.
Creepy little location. I thought the lighting was very good there.
A wonderful addition. Compare if this is like the remake Separate Ways' new original location, then it is dramatically better than the battleship level in the original Separate Ways, which is very.
I have one question that you guys are going to hate for me for bringing this up, possibly. Okay, so the files by the researcher who has what we're calling now El Nesto talks about being worried about the trust of Sadler. However, he talks down as if you can't trust Luis, but Luis ends up with the lab that's closest to the chapel at the end, as if Sadler gave him the better location. And the guy that seemingly is the better lab gets the one further away. Does that make any sense to anyone? I'm not quite sure why.
Maybe Sadler was playing them all off against each other.
Maybe. Or he didn't trust Luis, so he was keeping him under wraps by keeping him closer. I don't know. That's all I could... Well, but I thought it was kind of weird.
I think one of the files did say, to be fair, that this researcher deliberately moved her amber research well away to the edge of the island because it was so dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was them trying to come up with a reason why it was so far away from everything else. But I just thought it was so funny that like the lab, because technically I guess there wasn't really a lot up on that mountain except for the altar and the church of the at the top. You know, like that lab is also far away. But whatever, you know.
But I thought it was a good explanation for what they did with Krauser when she was saying, you know, all the top executives of the cult with the superior species Plaga, they won't allow themselves to be experimented on. But obviously, Krauser being the way he is in this remake version, you know, he'll snap up the chance of being enhanced.
Yeah, I thought that was really good.
Yeah, and then the research kind of gets halted because the lead researcher gets injected with the superior Plaga herself and just becomes a drone of Sadler, because that's from a file in the main game.
Yeah.
So I thought all that was really good.
Which comes down to why they didn't trust him, like thought that they were going to get in trouble, and it lines up perfectly. Yeah. In the last file, you find in the nest.
I must say, solid misdirection with the gondola sequence as well, because obviously there is a ruined gondola that you see behind the cabin siege in the village, but they've completely reworked it to the island now, which was very clever, and I didn't see it coming.
It's supposed to connect over the other side of that hill for it, and that's actually where that location is on the other side of that mountain. So.
And when you ride that gondola on the island, if you look down, you just see how vast the Los Illuminados operation is. There's like huge runways with like convoys of trucks and shipping containers. It's absolutely huge.
Yeah, that was the next thing I was going to say is when you first arrived at the stop, even before you get on the gondola and you walk up to the end and you can see, all the fuel tankers, trucks, like platforms, the massive dock they've got. Like, it really adds to that.
Someone did say you can spot the battleship from the base game somewhere. I don't know if that's true or not.
Is this you mean Wesker's one?
No, the Los Illuminados ship they were going to do the little invasion on.
Wow. The OG4.
Yeah, I'm sure someone has said you can see that docked somewhere, but I haven't found it.
I missed. I guess I just didn't look up in the U3 actual boss fight, but you can apparently see the cages from the original game suspended above you.
You actually see it twice because you ends up closer to the top after the fight, and
completely then.
I'm not sure if it was the cages. This is the thing. I'm not sure if it's the cages or if it's the floating platform that you fight Krauser on, because you end up there eventually going up that way. So, because they've both got lights on them and they're kind of floating. So I'm not sure if it is the cages or not. But if it is, it's because of that. And if it's not, it's just where you end up anyway because it's up above you. It's kind of hard to tell from down below.
I think it is the cages. I think it is.
Talking of U3, John, I know you weren't a particular fan of the final boss fight with him.
No, I just thought it was kind of shoehorned in because people were expecting U3 to turn up. And the original fight in the original game, even though it's silly when you're sort of running through that little obstacle course across the chasm, it's tense as hell. And I missed that from the remake version. And, you know, he's a very formidable boss in the original game. And in this, I just thought he was too easy. And where he sprays the little parasites all over the ground, so you can't run anywhere without them exploding all around you. I just found that really irritating. So, although I was pleased to see U3, I just thought he felt a bit too shoehorned in for me.
I got annoyed with those parasites because the way that he sometimes says them, if you don't realise you're up against a invisible wall, as it is on some areas, and a rock wall otherwise, they circle you so closely that if you bump into one, you get knocked down. Ada does like a staggered situation, then sometimes staggers herself into another one. It happened to me twice. It happened to me twice, and I was like, oh god.
I was going to take one moment to just segue and say, fuck the staggering and animation stacking in this game, because my god, it is excruciating. I'm not saying that every game needs iframes and things like that, but this game is just like, you can literally be stun locked to death, and you've got no chance to get out of it. And there's just entire encounters where a fucking grenade goes off, and then you sort of bump into another enemy who then pushes you, and then you stagger into another one, and then you get fucking hit by that one, and then a Plaga bites your head off. And
they grab you. Yeah.
There's nothing you can do because you won't even let you access the menus to heal or anything until you're literally in a non-staggered state, and that is a lot in this game.
I was frustrated, and I lamented the lack of iframes in certain encounters. It can feel a little overwhelming.
And I know some people would say, well, iframes make it too video gamey. We didn't get one of the best gaming experiences of all time in the original RE4 by happenstance. That was a well worked out little game. There's a reason why it's iconic, and that's because at times it did lead into the
felt balanced for the action. Yeah.
I thought the U3. I was slightly disagree with John on the U3, but I thought the U3 boss was quite a challenging one. At least it was certainly an ammo draining one.
Yeah,
I did it. I did it first time. I think Sean, you mentioned to me afterwards that if you die in the second part of the fight, you got to do the first part of the fight all over again, which should have annoyed me immensely.
Yeah, completely fucked first phase. Just missing, obvious shots and not hitting the weak points and its head enough. So when I went into the second section, despite picking up stuff, I got really bad RNG in the crates around the level that it didn't. I just had hemorrhaged too much health, and then I was very disappointed to realise that you go right back to the beginning of the first phase.
I did exactly the same thing, Sean. Exactly the same thing was the health thing. I just didn't have enough health going into the fight. I was already partially damaged, like just a little bit down, about a sixth or something like that, or an eighth, and had like one heal and like a herb left at that point, and it didn't give me any. Like the RNG didn't play. I ended up going, the one benefit, and I can see why it's there, is that if you decide that you went, I could spend some more money, or I didn't upgrade something, you can go back to the merchant just before the fight and change it, and then you get another auto save as you run back along the platform. So I went back and was like, I might as well upgrade a couple of the guns because I hadn't done that. I realized I hadn't done it, and I was like, it'll only help, and it did. Like the second time through, I just blitzed it, but it was funny that it did that.
I will say, narratively, I do think it is better that each of the main protagonists in Leon and Ada get their own Salazar right hand to fight. I did always find it a little bit disappointing that one of his right hands just gets absorbed with him in the original. So it is kind of cool that he dispatches one for Leon and one for Ada. It feels a lot more, tactical, like kind of what he would probably do.
Yeah, and the OG, of course, it is just, Sadler goes, you'll see my pet it, and it's like, new big boss randomly. This felt quite naturally occurring, if you like.
Well, yeah, the irony is here he's not related. He's not involved with really Sadler at all. He's Salazar's right hand in this, isn't he?
I think that
right hand, left hand. Your right hand comes off. I don't know.
I was looking at the maps and the areas that were added for this version, but because I was looking for like treasure markings as I was coming into each area. But looking at it, it's quite good to see it on. It shows you where it is in the overall map. Still, you get that like slightly opaque layering of the maps, and they really did work out the layout of this stuff compared to where it was in regards to the original layout game. It works really, really well. Like the nest thing ends up lining up perfectly when you're at that point of the fight. So she ends up, climbing her way back up, and there's all the nest parts that you come across, and like the underground of the castle lines up perfectly. Like it all lines up really, really well. It's very well designed.
I must say, I mean, again, this obviously is a benefit of it being made in tandem with the main game this time. But I will say that I thought I can't remember the name of the person. I had it memorized up until tonight, and it's gone. I blame the alcohol. Whoever makes the castle's sewerways, the waterways.
Gregor.
Gregor the Third. Gregor the Third. That new area for Ada is really well designed, really cool, and it's one of the only areas where it's quite open. You can go quite. I mean, ultimately you end up going the one way, but it gives the illusion of choice.
To me, that's another area that was missing from the original game. It's the bit in the original game where Leon goes underneath the castle with
the sewers. Yeah,
the sewers. Yeah, that bit. Where you had the only bit that's missing is the big swinging blades for no reason.
But I thought it was wicked, and it's one of the only times in Ada's campaign where it's genuinely dark in terms of lighting. And
it was. I almost got to the point where a couple of times I was like, it's a little too dark. I'm not sure I like this too much.
Shout out for Capcom for finding a way to get the ridiculous bulldozer section.
Yes.
I forgot about that. Yeah, or an allusion to it. Yeah.
That actually alludes to a more general point. I think they actually added a lot more puzzles than I thought they were going to do. And I will confess, I overthought these puzzles so much. to a point where I literally used up all my handgun ammo on the shield puzzle. I don't know why. I mean, the answer is literally there, isn't it? You pick up the file and it tells you number 1, number 2, number 3, and I'm going, what do I do here? And I was looking, and I was like trying to zoom in on.
Yeah, I was going to say you've got the 2 different ones of 5. So if you don't realize which way up you're actually looking at, yeah, that's which is part of it.
I was zooming in on the on the file to look at the look at the images, and then going through the entire room, looking and going, where's that one? And I didn't realise that they were all. The picture was of just the 5 that move, so I was shooting them all, going across. That's the one. There it is. And I was shooting it, and it wasn't moving. So I was like, shoot again. Am I shooting at the wrong point? Should I be shooting? And I was like, oh, this is getting ridiculous. And then eventually, that was half my ammo gone. And then I was at the, then I found the 5. And then I thought, oh, there they are. Okay, they're the 5. And then I was like, and I still didn't twig that it was literally just copy the order that they're in. And I was like, no, that's number 1. And
you are extraordinary, Nick. How have you ever finished a Resident Evil game?
I feel we found another element to Nick mode here.
It was painful, and I felt such an idiot after.
Give you the solution of a puzzle, but actually have it as being something completely different, because that's how Nick would interpret the actual solution.
There's got to be a trick to this. I just don't get it.
They were all so simple. The one where you follow the feet, the pathway.
The path for the lock, for the favourite specimens thing.
Yeah, that required a bit of time though as well. Just I don't know, I was mucking around, but
they did a tricky one where they had like a scarab and a different type of beetle on that to try and trick people. Like I could easily see how people might get that one easily confused without realizing.
When you mentioned the having to shoot the shields, I will say I did find that chapter a little bit disappointing, because when Lewis gives you the recipe for the medicine. I was hoping it was actually going to be a reasonably open-ended level where you could collect them in any order you want.
Oh yeah.
I was a little bit disappointed that it just funnels you in the way.
I'm sick of that garden maze. I'm sorry. I'm absolutely sick of that thing. It's just every time I have to replay it, I'm like, oh, not this again. And so of course, then when they make me do it in this, I'm like, here we go again.
It is better than the OG Separate Ways, because that was excruciating.
I'll
at least you can hook shot, you can hook shot over massive parts of it this time.
I greatly appreciated the lack of dogs. In Rio, and I got there, I was like, oh, not the dogs, please don't hit the dogs, and then it's just Plaga.
But then that's just as annoying to me. I almost would want the dogs because they're a little bit more predictable than the fact that all of a sudden the guy's going to do the head popping thing, and I end up with a bunch of like enemies with blades coming out of their heads again. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a bit of an ammo drain, that area as well.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, so it's about whereas the dogs are they're annoying, but at least they're an easier dispatch. So I don't know. It's much of a muchness to me, Nick.
Can I give a little shout out to the music? This was, I mean, I've always been a little bit critical of the remake music. Remake 2 is good, but barely audible. Remake 3 is a lot better. Remake 4 was good. Separate Ways was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and the use of the Ada theme at the end of the chapters was so good.
Yeah, they're at the top of their game. I genuinely mean this. I think Capcom are industry leading when it comes to soundtracks now.
I want to caveat even further. I think from a perspective of from a crafts side, that the engine is robust. It's been around for a while now and it's scaled perfectly. They've figured out all the little technical problems they were having, because you had a lot of shimmering and issues that they were having with reflections and Remake 2, and that's all gone now, more or less. I think from a tech perspective and a craft perspective, if you're talking about pure aesthetic, artistic one, both audio and visuals of these games are bloody solid. Like, you can't fault them, really.
No, and that's certainly one of the when we critique these games, the quality of all 3 recent remakes is beyond repute. Really, they're all top tier products. So.
And obviously not just that. They've expanded the RE engine to like other IPs now, and you've got a Street Fighter 6 that is fully scalable on PlayStation 4. you know, a near 10-year-old gaming machine can play a super modern fighting game. What we're seeing is a Capcom so on top of their game, it's ridiculous. Like, you know, when you think where we were 10 years ago with this studio, they were in a bad way. You know, they were making some seriously questionable calls. We talked about this on a previous podcast, like, you know, the Street Fighter X Tekken stuff and where the Resident Evil franchise was. Whilst I'm not personally overly happy with the remake saga, I have to admit, as products, and I'm using that word specifically tonight, as products, they're exceptional, and no one can be disappointed if you pick up a new Resident Evil product. Extremely good time, because they are top class games.
And I think that's the thing that's only more frustrating for me, and perhaps you guys as well, is that I see this quality and I'm like, I just want another new game with this quality.
Don't start me. I'm really having to hold back tonight.
but
really, I'm doing my best, guys, to hold on here.
Definitely agreed on the music front, though. Definitely agreed.
Yeah.
And we've seen further testing of that ever so tricky small key mechanic in separate ways. So
at least you can.
You say small key mechanic.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was disappointed because I was hoping to pick some up in the game, and then when they never came, and then I realised that you could only get them through the merchant spinal thing. I was disappointed that I've clearly missed so much loot.
And because it's a little bit linear, you don't really get to go back and.
Yeah, there's one at the start in the castle, and you can't get the map until after you've been past that point, and I don't know if you can go back or not.
Are they just treasure items then, or do you get any like equipment or anything?
It's all treasure items.
I didn't open any.
No, it's all treasure items.
Okay, I will say, incredible Capcom, well done for doing this. They actually made quests for the personal items that these thieving Ganado bastards steal off our cast.
Yes, the jacket.
There is actually a hand-in leather jacket to the merchant and Krauser's beret.
Yes,
ingenious. Because obviously the Leon jacket was a rather infamous one because it was a PS2 asset that was never improved. So if you play like the PS4 version, the Ganado that steals Leon's jacket is a very low quality model. It's hilarious.
Oh really?
Yeah, it stands out so much when you play the HD version.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because all the other elements are mostly the HD versions, but of course that was a model made specifically for the PS2 version that they never replaced with a high quality version. So yeah,
unless you play the HD Project
version or a completely remodeled version.
Any thoughts, John, on the music or other things we've just been rabbiting on about?
No, I agree with every word. I thought the music was superb, and I was really pleased to see Ada's theme in this. Just a shame it wasn't used in the original game. The base game, I should say.
I'm at the site and jacked into the main terminal. You're going to blow up this entire island. Including the president's daughter. But won't that make things harder for you?
There's no room for half measures. The weak exist to serve the strong. Enough talk. Bring me the amber.
We are towards the end. I want to quickly talk about the final boss with Sadler. We all knew when it was coming. It was probably the biggest clue that Separate Ways was coming in the original game, where obviously Leon is rescued, if you like, by Ada, and then she battles down the ashes, and then you assume that there's a battle going on, and there was with Sadler. I did not like this boss battle in the slightest. I found it very. I didn't get it in the sense that some of his moves were really weird. He almost had helicopter lightsaber type moves.
It's the same thing as the Salazar thing where he spews stuff.
Yeah, and I didn't. The actual battle area was very small. And it was it's almost like a tree shape, wasn't it? Kind of upwards and then kind of like spine. It wasn't a healthy area for a battle, should we say? Not very conducive to actually trying to get away from it. You could use the columns to hide from some of the spikes and the thing, but I mean he could get you from pretty much one end of the room to the other. And
can I admit something here?
Go on.
I just bought a rocket launcher
I knew you were going to say that, and as soon as you said you wanted to admit something, I was going to
I just was like, at that point, I just couldn't be bothered. I was just like, nah, I know what I'm going to do with this. I had the money. I was like, nah, I'm just getting the rocket launcher. I know I can't be arsed with this fight. I'm just going to blow him up, and it was brilliant, and I don't regret it one bit.
So you haven't played it properly yet.
Oh, I went back. I'd saved, so I went back to see what the actual fight was like after I finished the game, just to see. And so I saw some of the moves. That's how I know he does the splurting of stuff. But I fully agree that the area is too small and it's a terrible fight. It is a really bad fight, and so it only justified me even better. I felt even better about going. You know what? I'm just going to rocket launcher it. I've got the spare money.
Wow.
I don't regret that one bit.
I felt it cheap, but I didn't mind it too much. I felt it paled in comparison to the original because, as you say, Nick, I didn't feel the arena was as interesting. The original location for this fight was obviously the Plaga removal lab, and you could go into like little side rooms and stuff, and it almost made it quite tense. Like you could almost get yourself a brief respite for a few seconds before he marched into the room and fucked you up. Whereas this just felt more like a duke, a big duke out boss fight. Yeah, it didn't bother me too much. I am disappointed to know that there is a very special cutscene takedown of him with the knife that I missed.
Oh.
And I still haven't seen it yet. Yeah, apparently if you defeat him a certain way, there's a prompt that comes up, and if you hit it, Ada will dispatch him with a knife. The thing I found most jarring was the fact that clearly they couldn't get the actor to come back to a sound studio who plays Sadler. So all of his lines during the boss fight sound like they have literally been recorded on fucking Skype or something. Well, because he doesn't get any new lines in any cutscenes, so that tells me he was probably that there was no new motion capture stuff for Sadler. Likewise, Krauser. Obviously, Krauser has a boss fight in the original Separate Ways that doesn't happen in this one. But even Krauser's scenes in Separate Ways in the remake are all dialogue free. He's just there at a distance. Sadler, obviously, Ada fights, but his lines just feel like almost ADR'd. If you know what I mean by ADR, it's when like a voiceover sounds slightly off to what you're watching. Like, badly recorded ADR. I mean,
I was about to say that's not ADR. That's badly recorded ADR. Yes,
badly recorded ADR. Yeah, ADR is obviously a technique used in any movie ever made, but this felt like it was just like we can't have Sadler speaking nothing, so can we just potentially just get the actor on Zoom just to say a few things and we'll just chuck it on the game? That's kind of what it felt like a little bit.
I can't say I noticed that, to be honest. I was just pleased that he did speak, because I expected him to be silent, so I was pleased he did have new material.
He talks about wolves and lambs, doesn't he, or something?
Yeah, I'll have to look at that again, but I can't say I noticed.
I'll have to do it again.
It's a sacrificial lamb. And there's a similar moment where Ada meets Ashley in the next section, and Ashley's lines are just recreated from stuff she says in the main game.
It is a shame, because like you say, how this has been properly developed concurrently with the base game, it is disappointing that some of the characters don't have additional dialogue, like Krauser, as you say. You could understand in the original version because it was made after the fact, but with this one, if it was all pre-planned,
mostly pre-planned anyway, you'd think you'd have enough to have the script ready for.
Do we miss not having Krauser in the game? Obviously, that was a big part of the original Separate Ways.
The thing was, in the original Separate Ways, it gave a conclusive outcome to Krauser's demise, because you actually do see his heart explode and his mutation shrivels to nothing, whereas it didn't in the original. Whereas with the remake, Leon very definitively plunging his knife into his heart fully dispatched Krauser. The thing I found interesting was the fact that just as Leon's leaving an area in the main gate in the remake, there is a lingering shot on Krauser's body before the door's shut. And I was thinking, and I remember thinking at the time, I might have even said it in the review episode, is that an allusion to the fact that we're going to see him again in Separate Ways? But the illusion that the thing it alludes to is geniusly the ending of Separate Ways.
Yeah, so you were correct. It was Separate Ways. It just wasn't the way that you were expecting.
Yeah, it wasn't a boss fight. It's the fact that, and as John, I'll bring John in here. The ending of Separate Ways, probably. Apologies if we're jumping ahead briefly, Nick. But
no, we don't. No, it's fine.
About Krauser, the ending that we get in Separate Ways now is something that has only been previously mentioned in Japanese material.
Oh, Ada. To do with you.
The choppers is still within range, sir. Should we open fire?
No. Her little act of defiance changes nothing. Besides, we have all we need. We continue, as planned. Soon, the sun will set on the age of man.
When Darkside Chronicles came out in 2009, the following year, Capcom Japan released an art book called Inside of Darkside Chronicles, obviously only ever available in Japan. And it's one of these books where you'd think it's just full of artwork related to Darkside Chronicles, but it is stuffed with all kinds of background lore for practically every game in the series, and locked away in a tiny paragraph for a subsection on RE4 was a little thing saying, oh yeah, Wesker got the Plaga he uses in Resident Evil 5 because he recovered Jack Krauser's corpse, and that was the only mention to it ever until this game. And that's what continues to fascinate me about the Japanese material, is just all these things are locked away, and they end up turning up in games 10, 15 years later.
This goes back to what I was saying before, which is that, when we were talking about the removal of the Umbrella revival plot, it's like created a more consistent narrative. So if they had this idea anyway, and now you're going to show it, and this is going to lead into Resident Evil 5, I'm not going to use the other word, but it kind of is now, making a bit more of a consistent narrative that's actually visual, which is odd because they don't always do this, but in this case they've chosen to, which is, I guess, fine.
Yeah. And going with this ending as well actually adds a bit more believability and plausibility to Wesker being physically present on the island, because even though him appearing in the village seems very out of place, his appearance on the island kind of makes sense, because by that stage in the game you get the impression that he doesn't fully trust Ada's intentions anyway, and even in the base game, he's obviously had to go to the island himself at some point to get Krauser's body. So him being present actually makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, and the fact that you haven't got this whole Umbrella subplot and Krauser knowing about Umbrella and the whole Umbrella, I've said too much. Like, that's all gone now. So he's not really necessary plot-wise for Separate Ways anyway to be talking to Ada anymore. So again, that also makes sense that you don't need to have him in there more than he is, because he's just another character that's in Ada's way potentially if he was, but in this case Leon dispatches him, so it becomes irrelevant. So
the difference appears to be with this is, of course, that Jack Krauser is infected, if you like, with the superior species Plaga as opposed to the dominant species Plaga, which he is in the OG. Now, whether that makes any difference going forward, because they do, based on the files at least in the original game, that there is a significant difference between superior species and dominant species, which could be a bit of a lore headache going forward, because we know that the dominant species Plaga is then used to create Type 2 Magini, Type 3 Magini, and then I think its genes are also used in the stuff, liquors and things.
Yeah. I feel like they've essentially still got the two tiers. They've just named it different things now, because you've got this amber thing, and then so I think fundamentally it's another one of these classic things where, like, the core concept has not changed, but the way it's presented has been. So again, like we've talked about with other remake related things, it's like what baseline is true. There are two types of Plaga. They created these two types of things, but they've just changed the names, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I've posed the question whether they'll just interchange the names or whatnot, but we don't actually find anything out about the amber, really, do we?
No, not really.
all the allure of the base game, I think that it did fall flat. It's just it's got some resonance with the parasite, and we don't really know what it does.
The only bit you get more is more about Wesker's intention of it, not what it does.
Yes.
And even then, you could already guess what that was going to be anyway, based on what happens later and what we expect of the character. It's not like anything he says is truly revealing. The only difference is, John alluded to earlier, I think, the circumstances now of Wesker, and what you also, I think, said about in regards to the two types of Wesker we saw now kind of blending into this fully formed one type character.
I kind of got the impression from the few files we do get that the amber was basically the Mega My Seat equivalent of the Plaga
Mm.
community, if that makes sense. And I mentioned before how its experiments on Plaga has stimulated his Plaga and made him even stronger. So even though he's technically not got a dominant Plaga, he's basically got the equivalent of. So I don't really see too much of a problem with the circumstances of going into Resident Evil 5 and the creation of the Magini.
Yeah, it's just a naming thing, isn't it? Really, that's the difference.
Yeah,
It's not a context difference. Yeah, and that's what I was meaning before. It's just the same thing still applies. The same thing happens. The minutiae details may have changed slightly in this case, naming, but fundamentally it makes no difference to the actual context. The thing with Wesker for me, I've seen a lot of praise for Wesker and as like the character in this. I'm not enamored with this version of Wesker. I think he's a generic white guy villain type now. He doesn't have the maniacal twist or the intrigue or the slightly over the topness, which I think made that character for me as what he was. In theory, though, I guess it lines up with the whole concept of what we talked about with the remakes. Is a bit more subdued, a bit more realistic. It definitely lines up more with perhaps the Wesker of Resident Evil 1, as far as he's portrayed, and 0. So in that respect, maybe this is a course correct to not have him being the scenery-chewing villain. But then, of course, they will throw a saturation line.
Yeah,
for complete local saturation.
I loved it. I loved it. And
I knew you'd like that. As soon as I heard that, I thought, "Oh, Nick will be pissing himself at that."
I would say this. Hey, Nick, did you like that episode of Ahsoka where they said in a galaxy a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away as a piece of dialogue? Because that's the same joke. I fucking hated that. Hated it so much. Yeah, I was too on the nose for me. Too on the nose. But again, yeah, consistently inconsistent.
I do think the performance of Wesker's voice actor in this is very good. I think it's a well acted performance, but I do think
it's the character type,
yeah, but just by making him just angry, very angry villain, very angry taskmaster, just reduces him to.
I will
go on, Rob. I'll let you speak.
No, I'm just trying to say I agree 100%. That's what I should caveat that what I was saying before about the generic is not the performance. It's definitely not the thing. He's well acted. It's just that he's a very bland villain to me now. He's not. He doesn't seem like a very engaging villain. He's just like any other generic white guy villain. And I don't mean that as a derogatory term about white guy villains. It's just that I've seen it so many times. Wesker was different because he was different, and now you've turned him into other generic villain types. You've lost the point of what made him slightly more interesting.
Yeah, I do think I'm not going to mention previous voice actors because I know obviously there's a lot of controversy attached there, but I do think previous portrayals of Wesker with the sort of faux British accent did give him a uniqueness that made him Wesker. And I know obviously like Peter Jessup's performance and Pablo Cunt's performance was not obviously faux British, but they revised the character into that, and I do think made him memorable, if you like. Like Richard Wow and the other Wesker are memorable performances, whether you appreciate the talent behind it. I say in inverted commas. He was unique and totally isolated in the uniqueness to Resident Evil. I'm not saying it was in any way wonderful, but certainly memorable. And
it's a presence. It's a presence of character that just is there. Like that, this character is well acted, but the character, the way it's written, doesn't have that sort of presence. I don't feel he's a sneering villain, but I don't feel the maniacalness behind his intent because it's so subdued. Whereas it feels like Wesker, as a character, previously got more and more maniacal and more insane the more crazy he got. And it lined up, if that makes sense. And now you've got this guy talking essentially about being a god again. It seems so subdued.
Please don't think I'm being, because it's going to be. I'm trying to sidestep the issue here, if you can't tell already. This is a difficult subject to approach because obviously controversies that have occurred with one of the voice actors. But I will say there's been some slight revisionist history by the fact that performance was previously celebrated by a lot of people in the community as a very definitive version of the character. I think it's been tainted a lot by what's happened, that people are very quick to embrace this version of Wesker that I do feel is less memorable, less unique.
I I can sum that up in a very easy way for you, Sean. The fact that something like complete global saturation has become its own kind of like internal community meme is part of based on that performance. And if you are now saying it was not great, then why did that take off?
That's a good point. Yeah, it's a very good point. I'm not excusing any behaviour or anything like that. So please don't think I am. And if I've been tripping over myself trying to get this point out, then you can tell it's a difficult point I'm trying to make. But
a worthwhile one, absolutely.
You know, that performance was once upon a time kind of celebrated by the community, and I appreciate now you can't do that.
I wanted to say that there'll be people out there that enjoyed this new version of Wesker's performance because, as I said, the performance is great, and they might want this character. They might think that the old Wesker was so over the top and ridiculous that this is actually more what they wanted. And if that's the case, that's awesome. I just think that to me, it's missing what made their character slightly more unique by being slightly off kilter. Yeah,
it's lost its uniqueness in the sake of snarling villain, as you say.
All I think it's done though is just brought that version of Wesker a bit closer, earlier in the timeline. So going back to what I was saying earlier, there is a consistency now with this Wesker compared to RE5 Wesker. At least,
but this is close. The thing about that, Nick, is I'm going to interrupt again. I keep doing this tonight. I'm so sorry. But that doesn't make sense because tonally, by this point, he should be closer to the Resident Evil 5 Wesker than he is to the previous Weskers. That's my biggest issue with it, is that by Resident Evil 5, he should be closer to the Resident Evil 4, he should be closer to the Resident Evil 5 version than he would be to the STARS era. I don't expect him to be the level of Resident Evil 5, but I wouldn't expect him to be like the subdued... Because he isn't by Code Veronica almost, He's the type of person who's snarling at Chris, about.
This is John. This is a great time for you to step in. But he doesn't have this revelation of global domination until he's spoken to Spencer, which hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I take his performance in Resident Evil 5 as being a bit unhinged. It's when Spencer explains his origins to him that breaks the sort of subliminal hold over him in regards to the Wesker Children project. That's when he sort of goes a bit off the rails. And for me, whether it's headcanon or not, that explains to me why he's a bit maniacal in Resident Evil, at the latter stages of Resident Evil 5. And this Resident Evil 4 performance precedes his meeting with Spencer.
But he's already talking about stuff like he has met Spencer.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they've brought the timeline forward, or they seem to have, but we don't know the full details behind it all yet. But no. I didn't mind his performance in this. I was just pleased to see him back. I mean, yes, he does sound, very generic bad guy, but then again, we all know who Wesker is by this point. He's got nothing to hide, and I enjoyed his to and fro's with Ada. I especially liked his reaction on the island where she sort of vaguely threatens him, and is so impressed by that he just sort of cocks his head and goes, interesting. I really loved that reaction, and he seemed very impressed that Ada had the balls to even challenge him.
Whose blood are you here for this time? Mine or Sadler's?
That all depends on you. Change of plans. Of course, you're free to refuse.
Think that gun's gonna be enough?
Interesting.
Little moments like that I appreciated about this iteration of the character, and I've got to admit the whole ending where he was just listening on the radio about them trying to hail the helicopter and him walking along, the slow reveal of Krauser's body and the RE5 theme kicking in, it made my hair stand on end. I really appreciated that. I thought it was very, very well done.
I think that's fundamentally why I was so conflicted about him being on the island, is that the scenes are really good, but I'm still like, I don't know why he's really on the island if he's getting Ada to do this, because I feel like he could have done this. The fact that he has to keep motivating her to do it, it's almost like he probably could have done this a lot quicker himself at this rate, if that's how it feels.
It's just dangerous to make him ineffectual.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. But the scene that you just described there, John, of him doing that slight sort of head turn and saying interesting, is the closest a Wesker performance has been to Peter Jessup's in the remake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which had that air of mystery about him. And I know for a lot of people, like Peter Jessup's remake Wesker is their definitive Wesker. Because again, in itself, it's such a unique, weird performance with all these strange pauses in between dialogue and stuff. It's a great Wesker. And it's kind of nice to go back to that sort of more subtle, less pantomime villain theatrical Wesker. Richard Weil laments a little bit. You know, I know he's gone back and said he finds his Code Veronica performance a bit over the top and wish he could do it again.
But as I say, I think maybe that's the version they showed him, or the way they directed it. Is they went off, that was what they wanted from a directorial point. Because we've talked about this, is like there's a particular type they've gone with, dialogue and the style. The same thing with Ada, and so maybe that's what they did. They gave him an example and said, we want it more like this version, and that's how it's going to be. I mean, we won't know unless it's asked, but I feel like maybe that's the clear direction they gave, and that's what they got.
If anyone ever gets a chance or to interview Craig, I can't remember his surname, I do apologise. The RE4 remake Wesker will be interesting if they've based his character on the remake Wesker as opposed to the faux British Richard Wow other actor Wesker.
It's certainly something. Not that there are rumours, aren't there, of Code Veronica and maybe even RE1 getting another remake. The only thing I think would be quite interesting is just to see what they did with Wesker. The beauty of RE1 Wesker is that he legitimately could be the STARS captain because he's professional, and very calm, collected in a crikey where he is, what he's doing, why he's doing it, and that works quite well. I wonder then how that would work. Are we going to see him be this god delusional character so early on, whereas in the original timeline, if you like, even with Code Veronica, he was out there just to sell himself to the opposing corporation. He wanted to, get out of Umbrella's grasp, if you like. He wanted to, yes, power, but it is very different. It wasn't me as the head, it was just me making my own way in life, albeit very nastily. I just wonder where they'll go with that. Other than that, I don't want another remake of 1, but whatever. We'll potentially cross that bridge when we get to it.
You certainly have to alter his voice a little bit so he doesn't sound like such an evil generic villain when he's still trying to be the STARS captain.
Exactly, yeah.
Chris, go that way.
Jill, I have no time for your incompetence.
Perhaps every game he'll say now complete local saturation at some point.
There seems to be complete local saturation in this mansion. Yes.
They're not. Yes, Rockfort. Anyway, before we wrap up and do our reviews, we do have a call-in from Umbrella Inc. Let's hear what he has to say.
Hey, RAP team. It's Joe, a.k.a. Umbrella Inc. over on Discord. I was really excited for this. I got up at 4 a.m. so I could play it for a few hours before having to go into work. And those opening bits with Luis and Ada dancing, Ada hallucinating during the U3 fight, and then Wesker saying complete local saturation, I felt like I was having some kind of stroke. It was an amazing experience. I think the developers really had a lot of love for Resident Evil 4, and it really shows here. And now we can say that almost nothing was left on the cutting room floor of transitioning from the original to the remake. I really enjoyed seeing Wesker there in person. It made sense for his character. One, he wasn't really there to help Ada out after she passed out. He took that as an opportunity to get a sample of her blood, and I'm glad that they showed that. And then when he was on the island, he was there to give Ada the suitcase to blow up the island, and then later finding out that he took Krauser's body, and it's nice to see that officially confirmed outside of a small tidbit. Just had a lot of fun with this. I think the verticality, level design to really show off the grapple hook. I think Ada and her combat is way more fun. It's so much easier to land hits. Just has an overall great feeling. I really enjoyed Lily Gao's performance. I think this really helped kind of contextualize why she was so stone-faced in the main campaign. I liked that she made little comments and facial gestures after getting off the phone with Leon. And I really hope that Lily is celebrated this performance. Overall, I had an excellent time. It's definitely worth $10. I had made a joke on Discord saying watch it be longer than Evil 3, and it kind of was. The only real critique of the game, and this is a just aesthetically personal opinion, I did not like the creature that you find in the basement that you have to run from. I thought it had like a real Street Sharks vibe to it, and when compared to that amazing design of the U3, it just didn't do anything for me, and I was a little disappointed by that. But that's a minor criticism to an overall amazing package, and I'm so glad that they delivered on Separate Ways. I think with this one we can confidently say the remake is far and away superior to the original. And lastly, this game's soundtrack had no right going as hard as it did. It's any longer. Have a great night, guys. Thank you so much.
Street Sharks, half man, half shark.
Yeah, I was wondering if someone was going to say that.
I remember
Thank
those
you.
old commercials.
Thank you, Umbrella Inc., for a really good summary, actually, touching on pretty much every element there. Yeah, another big fan of the dancing. It's such a bold introduction, isn't it? Just a random dance-off almost in a cell. It's very...
and Nick, he's your kindred spirit in the soundtrack.
It was notably good. I very much agree with them over that point.
So the only real bold claim that I think we need to discuss is Remake total as a package better than the original? That's a bold call.
It is a bold call for me, 100%. I just find this a lot more accessible than the old game. But I'm a Wii user, if you like, and so I'm just getting too old to play on the Nintendo Wii. I find the use of the modern controls just that little bit better on a game like this. But that's very much a personal preference.
I'm so split down the middle.
It's a better game. I think in terms, but it's not a better game. It's better and it's not better because it can't be, because the gameplay loop of the original is timeless, and I'm already bored of the remake after 6 months. Whereas I can fire up the original RE4 and have the best time with that gameplay loop. In fact, if anything, the GameCube original is the best playing version of that game because it's so tailored to that controller. It feels at home. That game, yes, it goes on too long. The campaign is far too long and all that bullshit, and it has ridiculous lava levels and all this shit. But fuck me, it plays so well. Like, Mikami was on fire when he made that game.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same mindset. It's not. I think this is a fundamental. I think we separate out. This is a fundamentally better Separate Ways. I don't think that's a question.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But there's a caveat to it, which I'll get into in my final review.
All I would say is that this is similar to RE4, the original, in the same way that RE1 is very similar to Remake 1. They're both over-the-shoulder style games with slightly different controls, better graphics improvements, things like that. And it's similar to the original RE1. It's still a pre-rendered style with gameplay improvements, better graphics. Whereas RE2 and 3, they are very different games.
There's also a fundamental difference in the approach as well. Is that, like, Resident Evil 4 at no point felt like it was disrespecting what came before. Everything Resident Evil 4 does bolts on and makes arguably better the lore and everything of the original, whereas 2 and 3 are arguably diminished experiences in terms of lore and storytelling to what the original games did.
And in the case of 3, length.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is he makes allusion to that point. But like for a lot of people, Separate Ways as a DLC will be a longer experience than RE3 Remake. Yes.
Yeah. 100%.
I think my first playthrough of Separate Ways was longer than my first playthrough of RE3.
He makes point about, he said blood sample being taken. I think I know what he's referring to. It was a bit of a blink and you miss moment in the castle. I thought that was almost PG, whatever it was, or supposed to have been his injection, but
no, you've seen that on Twitter, Nick. It's not true.
No, I've not seen that. That was my original thought. I thought,
is that it into the bottle, not withdrawing it?
So he has taken a sample of Ada's.
That's what it's alluding to. He's injecting something into a bottle, not withdrawing it.
Oh.
So it's Ada's blood sample,
which while she's infected too. So
well, I'm on the fence about that. He could simply be injecting her with something to bring her around. Because how does he even know she's infected at that point?
No, I'm not sure. Maybe other than that she's passed out and he rescued her. But again, this is why I'm confused. This is why I'm confused if he's tracking her, because I mean he's tracking her obviously on some level, but whether or not he's following her around a lot more than it seems, and that's why I'm very confused by this, because he just conveniently happens to turn up exactly at the right time when she passes out. Otherwise, which is, I mean, it's not impossible. You have plot conveniences like this often, so it's not impossible. But it seems like he's kind of keeping tabs on where she is for most parts, which is also why he's not surprised when she double crosses him at the end.
Yeah, I must admit, I don't like his appearance in the village. It kind of came across to me like it was simply Capcom saying, right, you've wanted him back, here he is, and we're not just going to stick him on a fucking computer monitor 3,000 miles away. We're really going to put him here. They haven't really put too much thought behind it because they just want to embrace the fanfare. His appearance on the island makes sense, but I don't think his particular reason for being on the village is a good one. There's no real need for that scene. There was no real need for Ada to pass out at all.
Right. We've reached a point where I want to hear everyone's review scores. Then, so our usual out of 10. Rombie, where do you sit on on Separate Ways, and then perhaps overall RE4? Now we've got the complete package.
Okay, let me think about this. I have to caveat again that I was so burnt out on the main game because I had played it a lot and then kind of just put it down, and then I realized, I'm so close to finishing the last few things I had left to get trophies, collectibles, unlocks, that I went, okay, well, Separate Ways is going to be a little while away, so I'll do it. And so the literal week that it was announced, I just finished. So it came with a bit of oh god, it's too soon kind of mentality. So I went in with probably a negative attitude. That said, I think nitpicks that I have aside, little things, I think the value for money for this DLC is good. Obviously, some people will argue that when it was an original release, when it was re-released on PS2, although many people, that was the first time they played it, it was a free inclusion in the base unit price. But I think we don't expect that anymore, so we expect this to be DLC. I think for the value that you get, plus the fact it came with a free Mercenaries upgrade anyway, so you got that on the same day regardless of whether or not you paid for this DLC or not. I think that's great. I think it fleshes out Ada's character. It feels like a proper true B scenario to the main game. It creates some amazing new areas. The gameplay loop with Ada is much more engaging than Leon's, especially once you add in the ability to grab shields off enemies. That's a game changer. I think narratively it's interesting. I think the changes are not drastically groundbreaking where they're made, and the ones that for the most part it doesn't change. I like the fact that it fleshes out a couple of things that were already in canon but hadn't really been shown, like Krauser's body. And I think it's a solid package. I think from a general perspective, I'd give it like an 8 for narrative and a 9 for gameplay, if I had to split it into two halves, because I want to in this case. As for the whole package, I think it improves the whole package of Resident Evil 4 as a whole. I don't think it would change my score overall on the game as a solid, because I'm still feeling burnt out, which makes it very hard for me to judge. So I won't adjust any scores on that. But I think for anyone who's finished the main game, they should definitely get the DLC to play the whole package, because I think it's a worthwhile inclusion.
Batman, where do you sit?
I think Separate Ways is a triumph, to be honest. I think when you compare it to the original, I played the original today, as I mentioned off air, and you forget how bare bones it is. The original Resident Evil 4 was a really, really long game. We got Assignment Ada with that as well, so there was no real need for Separate Ways other than, a cash grab to get everyone to rebuy it. But it doesn't really add anything, and it doesn't enhance the story in any way, really, other than a few cutscenes with Wesker, whereas this version of Separate Ways, pretty much adds a completely new story, including brand new subplots, new enemies, and we're not just going through recycled levels either. We've got wholly new original levels. So in that sense, I think Separate Ways, and considering how cheap it is as well, is 100% success and complements the base game perfectly. And as for Resident Evil 4 overall, I've got to be honest, even though I've got total respect for the original game, I think I prefer the remake now. If I go back to the preview episode we did before the main game was released, I had a list of things that I hoped Capcom were going to address in this game, and they've done pretty much all of it. Story-wise, the original game was much maligned because it was so far removed from what we got before. Whereas you can't say the same about this game, really. There's so many connections, there's a large cast of characters, they all get good screen time. I think this is now one of the best storylines for a Resident Evil game, probably outside the Mansion incident in Raccoon City. I think this is probably a better storyline than Resident Evil 5 for me now, and I've always championed Resident Evil 5 storyline. I think my only nitpick about the whole thing from a narrative point of view is, even though I understand the reasons why they were cut out, I kind of wish they'd kept the Umbrella revival plot and the whole subplot with the organisation. And one of the best things about the original game was Krauser and Ada, their relationship playing off each other to please Wesker. And I kind of wish this was still there, especially with Wesker being present on the island. That dynamic could have been further enhanced between the three of them. And obviously, I would have liked an updated Ada's report, but other than that, I think the remake of Resident Evil 4 is utterly phenomenal. I think they've treated the original game with complete respect, which is why this has ended up so much more successful than the likes of the Resident Evil 3 remake. Separate Ways, I'll probably give a 9, and the whole remake experience, I'll probably give a 9 out of 10. I think it's pretty much perfect. There's not much more they could have done to make it better, in my opinion.
From my point of view, I come at all these, the action trilogy, if you want to call them that, 4, 5, 6, with not disdain. I think that's an unfair term, but it's not really my type of RE. I've always made that quite clear. There are bits in Remake 4 I really enjoy, but I've always said Village is kind of my limit in terms of action versus survival horror. So whilst the Remake 4 was a bit of an endurance test for me, I appreciated the speed and the completionist elements of Separate Ways. It was fun to go through it. I didn't feel it was a chore. There's a couple of points where I was like, oh my god, it's getting annoying. But other than that, it's a well thought out process. And as others have said, it flows significantly better than the original Separate Ways. And as I've also said, I give it a little bit of a pass because it is an add-on as opposed to the main campaign. So even if, say, for example, Resident Evil 4 was the ultimate survival horror experience as opposed to, say, survival action experience, I wouldn't have minded Separate Ways taking this action approach. Even if this was a completely whoa experience, where did this come from? I would have still enjoyed it. For me, it's very much of the same, isn't it? If you enjoyed Remake 4 base game, you're going to enjoy Separate Ways, and I would recommend anyone getting it for it's only is it £9 in England? I can't remember what it is. It's very cheap for what you get. It's being critically lauded for that. In terms of a score for Separate Ways, from my personal viewpoint, and keeping with that Strictly Come Dancing, it's a 7 from me. Stars. Oh! Before I go to stars. In terms of the overall RE4 experience, I agree with John. I think this is better than the original, and I hate myself for it. But that's only because I just don't bond with the original game. I never have, and I never will. And I don't bond with this one particularly much more, but because it's a little bit easier to control, it works a little bit better for me, and I do like the overall presentation of it, whereas original RE4 is a little bit brown, but that's fine. That's fine.
Just a little bit brown. Yes.
Speaking of brown, I do miss the brown colour palette of the original.
Yeah, there is a charm. Yeah, there is a charm to it at the same time. A bit like the RE5 filter. You go, oh, it's horrible, but is it? Anyway. So there we go. Yes, it's a 7 from me. It improves RE4 experience considerably, and I like it in that sense. But will I play it again? Yeah, I'm going through it at the moment. That'll be it for a long time after that. STARS TyranT.
Well, the whole experience with Separate Ways has made me utterly crestfallen. I've been using a term tonight, which is product, and I have to differentiate my own personal feelings toward the product and review it as a product. Because as a product, it's magnificent. If you want me to rank Remake 4 as a product, Separate Ways is a 9 out of 10, Remake 4 is a 9 out of 10. It's so strong. It's a phenomenal piece of Resident Evil entertainment, and I think for the fans it's gone down very well. I'm very happy for them, but for me, this is not where I wanted to be, and I am struggling. I won't lie. This has been a miserable week for me post playing Separate Ways. Not necessarily because what I've played is bad, what I've played is very good, but what I've played tells me that we are potentially looking at the eradication of the original timeline. And John said, we don't want to be going, we've crossed into remake talk too much tonight, and I do agree, but all I've seen post playing Separate Ways online is remake talk. No one wants to discuss the plot points that Separate Ways has added. All people want to talk about is where the series is headed in terms of remakes. This is literally the online discourse now, is what remake are we getting next? And this is exactly where I warned we would end up being 8 years ago when Remake 2 was announced. And for me personally, this is a miserable landscape. I utterly reject the idea of remakes. I don't like them. I don't like, for the most part, director's cuts that revise movies and things like that years later that feel you can do something better. That's not to say that I don't appreciate, like the Alien Special Edition, or, even to some extent like the Blade Runner Final Cut. That they have to be within context. They have to be with some idea in mind. If they're studio cash grabs, I have no time for them. And unfortunately, the remakes train feels for me like it's kind of turned into a cash grab. The Ethan saga, I think, has not landed well with a lot of people in the community, and it's left Capcom with a bit of a dilemma, because obviously they pushed Village really hard, and Village continued a saga that a lot of people were already rejecting because they didn't like the direction 7 went. Yet Resident Evil 2 Remake went off really, really well. People loved it. And Resident Evil 3, yeah, people say Resident Evil 3 didn't resonate well with people, but when we get to the Remake Reflections podcast, you're going to have some shocks with regards to the Twitter polls, because that game's resonated harder than I think a lot of people would care to admit. And now we're into Remake 4, and Remake 4, as we've talked about tonight, changes a lot to do with the lore. It removes a lot of that key backstory that kept us all going all those years when Resident Evil was not in its best place. And we're now looking at a point where, instead of going forward and forging on with like Revelations 3 or Revelations 9, all anybody wants to talk about is Remake 5. And I'm struggling. I can't conjure my enthusiasm now. I just can't do it. This podcast has been a hard episode to get through, because I've tried to remove myself and rate Separate Ways as a product, because as an individual piece of entertainment, it's wonderful. It's incredible value for money, but personally, for what I want from this series, it's not it. And I did not have a great time playing it, because what I was looking at through every section, every step I took forward as Ada, was a revised version of a timeline that I love. And I'm in a dilemma, because I feel like I can't give our audience a fair listen if I'm just fucking miserable and dour all the time about this shit. And if remakes are going to be it going forward, then I don't know where I exist within that, that wilderness.
The thing for me, Sean, is that I feel like fundamentally the unfortunate thing is this is proven so well. It's not a case of is there going to be more remakes? I think it's pretty clear there is.
Yeah.
What's going to be the next remake? They're all going to be remade at this point. If you're talking about 5 or Code Veronica or 0 or even another remake of 1, I'm expecting all of those are the answer eventually. But when?
This is what I found heartbreaking when we compare the Separate Ways experience to take it away from me and to take it back to Separate Ways. Is when the first Separate Ways came out in 2005. It was tail end of 2005 on PlayStation 2. Forums were ablaze with giant pharmaceutical company S. What was Ada's motivations? What's Wesker's motivations? Where's the series going to go from now? What are we going? Where do we possibly go? And no one guessed we were going to go to Resident Evil 5, because how could you? Whereas now, the post-Separate Ways chat that exists today is, what remake are we getting next?
Is it 5? Is it Code Veronica? Yeah.
To me, it's the most redundant thing, because I've lived this shit already. I've lived it for 20 years. I can't do it again. I'm too old. I'm too long in my tooth now, that I'm not interested in living this series again. If we get a Remake 5, do people realise that we are only 2 more numbered games from potentially a Resident Evil 7 remake? To me, that is absolutely preposterous. Then on the same day that 5 remake trailer goes live on the internet, people are going to be talking about the 6 remake, and like this is just literally, for me. I want everyone listening to know, and this is my final point. I'm not going to rabbit on because I've already held you time enough tonight. For so many people, when that Remake 5 trailer goes live, you're going to have the greatest, probably, Resident Evil fan night of your life. You're going to love it. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be the wonderful production value. Just know that I'm sitting somewhere in England having the worst evening of my life. Enjoy that. Just know that I'm supping a Stella so hard that I'm probably going to drink the tin in itself.
Wow.
It's just this is the worst timeline for me, and that's me signing out. Goodbye, everybody. You all win. I'm still waving that white flag from about 6 episodes ago. I am broken, and this is it.
I'm always reminded of that review that called us the anti-fan podcast, and I've never thought of this ever being true until I just heard that rant. I'm like, I don't want any more remakes. I don't want to be on this train anymore.
The thing
Go
is,
on, roll
Rob,
that review.
The thing is, Rob, it's so hard because as a product,
They're brilliant.
You know, it is.
I know.
That's
the
dichotomy. You can't deny the craft and the
This is the thing. Yeah, Sean. I think this is the thing we've got to separate out is that because you keep saying it as a product, and I get it, but we've got to think of it as a cohesive whole. In that, if the product itself is well designed and people aren't as enamored with the minutia of the plot like we are, then for them it's the perfect experience. They don't care. The bare bones narrative works because it's still the fundamental same, you know. And the reasons why people react negatively more are because either their favorite location or their favorite event hasn't happened, or something is missing that was like iconic, but not necessarily does that need to be plot or lore related.
The thing is, for me, it's like, is Resident Evil 4 Remake and the remake of Separate Ways a better version of that story? It absolutely is. But the problem for me is, like, I have to have an all or nothing approach because I can't pick and choose because I'm not that kind of person. Because I think it's disrespectful and I think it diminishes the storylines you're choosing to remove. So, for example, like, I can't be one of those people who accepts that both entries exist at the same time. Like Remake 3 and OG 3, it's all the same canon. You know, I know Fabiano said it, but I can't buy it. I cannot subscribe to that theory that Jill and Nemesis go to insert Umbrella location and Jill fires a railgun and dispatches Nemesis. It has to be either the Dead Factory or Nest 2, and you have to stick to your line, and that's it. And you can't at the same time say, well, hey, I'm going to choose OG3 but Remake 4. The only exception I give is the remake of the original game because that's made with entirely different circumstances in a different era.
I was going to say that, and I mean, I don't want to go down this whole full remake thing now, but I should at least say at least in response to that is probably my biggest concern with these remakes. Is not that fundamentally there's anything wrong with the idea of a remake or that these remakes are poor. They're clearly very well crafted products. It feels like the biggest missed opportunity with a lot of these remakes, and the reason why 4 is so more conflicting, is that they have been changed so variably when you had more chance to actually make more cohesiveness. So like Remake 4 is perhaps more cohesive to the games around it than 2 and 3 were, and even 2 to itself, like we've talked about with A and B scenarios. And it seems like what they should have been doing when they were planning Remake 2 and they decided to go for this full remake change format they've gone for was figure out, okay, if we're going to do this and it sells, we need to make sure that if we're going to make a 3 remake, that we create a scenario craft that actually allows these two things to tie in better than they previously did. And thus, going forward for any other remakes, should they happen, they should have planned for a best case scenario, because they've gotten that best case scenario. The games are well received, they've sold well, so you had a perfect opportunity to actually get them more aligned, and yet we've gone mostly backwards and made them less aligned, which for remakes kind of seems counterproductive.
Yeah.
I think what makes Remake 4 100% success for me is everyone was upset with the narrative of the original game because it was so far removed. And this has fixed this 100%. You know, the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3, even though a majority of the community absolutely love them, I think pretty much everyone still agrees that the original storylines of the original games are better than the remakes. But Resident Evil 4 Remake has changed all that. Remake 4 storyline is far superior. If the Remake 4 storyline was the original Resident Evil 4 storyline back in 2005, we would have been all over it, and the game would not have got any of the criticisms it did.
Well, that in itself is fundamentally true because the Separate Ways edition in the PS2 version was almost, as I said, like a knee-jerk reaction to the negativity of the lack of explanation and plot regarding like Umbrella and what was happening. It was almost like they went, oh yeah, we should probably explain that a bit more and connect it a little bit more to the wider universe. So yeah, if you'd planned that out, if you had that intent and they had the time back then to actually plan it out more, because Mikami's clearly said he just needed a narrative for this gameplay change and went with the simple answer of basically wiping the slate, right? So yeah, it's definitely true. You're 100% correct. We would have been, just if this was the plot back then, we would have been like, oh my god, where's this going? But we still would have been like eating it up way more because it would have opened up all sorts of new possibilities.
If I was doing my timeline now, I would have to pick a side, for example, and my side would be the OG. And because that, for me, that's an all or nothing approach, that means the OG version of 4 has to be included. Batman, you've just thrown massive praise to Remake 4's way. So how the fuck do you approach this in your mythology? Because you've just basically said Remake 4 is a better version of that story. So are you going to go, well, for Remake, for Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to, choose the remake of Resident Evil 1 because that's generally accepted as the canon. The OG 2 and 3 because that's generally the accepted versions of that story. But for 4, I'm going to choose the remake.
No, for reasons you've just said. I think it's disrespectful to the original writers as well. You've got to do it twice. You've got to present two continuities, even if that's not what Capcom are trying to get across with these remakes. It's the only way to include all the storyline. If you want all the plots with Krauser being affiliated with Wesker and you want the organisation, you have to go with the original Resident Evil 4. You can't just somehow stitch that into the remake 4 verse because it's clear that Krauser is not affiliated with Wesker, even though there is that interesting file that hints he knows who Wesker is, which is why he's got the red warheads. But no, in answer to your question, I've got to present two separate timelines, not necessarily to try and say, look, there is two separate timelines, but if you want to appreciate the whole story, that's the only way to do it. You can't pick and choose. You can't stitch one over the other. They've got to be presented separately.
And for the same reason that you guys are discussing this, like you could be a fan of the original narrative and want to read about that in a timeline format, and you also might be a fan of the new remakes who want to read that in a remake format, and you don't want to confound those two and have both those people disappointed that it doesn't make sense because they're like, I played the remakes and that never came up and I don't understand why that's relevant and it doesn't match. And the person who's playing the OG versions reading it and the vice versa. It's like you have to present it that way. It's unfortunate. I mean, it's not like there isn't crossover and there isn't some of the event. The Krauser thing's a perfect example, something that you gleaned from the OG canon that was literally put into a little paragraph is now been made true in the remake version, but that doesn't make it any less true in either version. It obviously does exist in both, but you had entirely different ways as to how you found that out, and yet they're accurate in both. So I don't know, it's kind of tough.
And this is why my answer is complex, Nick.
Very brief. Not a very brief summary.
I can't throw away. I can't throw away 15 to 20 years worth of lore just like
for
that.
A better product. Yeah.
My only hope to save you, Sean, is I still think there's a good chance that we might eventually get remake fatigue, in the sense that if you go back 20 years ago when the remake of the first game had just come out, people were starting to get sick of the camera angles, they were starting to get sick of the tanky controls, they were starting to get sick of T-virus outbreaks. It was just the same stuff recycled again. We've already had 3 over-the-shoulder Resident Evil engine remakes. How many more can Capcom put out before people start critically and commercially saying, right, we've had enough of these now, you need to start moving forward?
Oh, because people are insatiable for them at the minute. Yeah. So, Nick, 9 out of 10.
We will. If it's possible, we'll get to this even more in the next podcast, which is either.
Well, you've had Remake Reflections as free DLC for this one, I think.
Yeah. For paramedics standing by for Sean.
Yeah. That does finish our Separate Ways analysis and slightly extended look as well as the overall picture, but we'll be coming back to that in due course. It is now time for this podcast edition of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
Do you know your G virus from your C virus? And your Jabberwock from your Bandersnatch? Or perhaps the number of bombs that appear on the Made in Heaven vest?
Jesus Christ. Fucking question is that?
I'm getting a big fat zero this week.
Yeah, I'm not going to get any of these.
We've talked about the games straying too far from the origins. This Resident Evil quiz, we're now getting Spice Girls as the correct answer. I mean, it's time to quit.
This is Neptune Biohazard Quiz. Batman. STARS TyranT. George Trevor. Rombie the Plaga. Mr. Spencer. Neptune Biohazard Quiz.
So to wrap up the podcast, we have 5 new questions. If you can clear away your desktop, you can open up Notepad. Here we go. So question number 1 comes in from Rigatoni Weston and Umbrella Inc., who called in earlier. They randomly sent me the same question. It was that popular. Obviously something they both picked up on in their playthrough of Separate Ways, but here it is. In Separate Ways, what corporation is revealed to have supplied Krauser with the overpowered red warheads?
Oh, I read this too. Fuck.
I read this as well at the time. I thought, I will note this, and I was very pleased that 2 of our patrons, came up with the same question. Okay, question number 2. We've had the answer to this already, so were you paying attention? The Black Robe is also known as the U3, but what else? Got another name. Question number 3. This is more base game, Resident Evil 4. So what is the largest case you can acquire in Remake 4? So numbers, something by something. That's what we're after there. In the options with the merchant. Question number 4. So leaving Remake alone there. Question number 4. What is the name of the doll in Village, in Resident Evil Village? You get the head and the body. And finally, question number 5. What are the 3 animal keys in Wild Things, as in Outbreak File 2? So they're the 5 questions. Let's see how well everyone has gotten on. So question number 1 was, what was the corporation revealed? What was the corporation that made the red warhead in Remake 4? STARS TyranT, did you know?
I did not know.
Did not know. I thought everyone would have picked that up. Rob?
I did not pay enough attention. I'm so sorry.
You did not, no. Rob?
I can't remember. I remember reading it and going, I should remember this, and completely have blanked. It's the file right beside the bloody warhead.
It is. Batman, did you know?
Newman Arms Corporation, I think it is.
Of course it is, yes. Newman Arms. Very good. Very good. Whether they appear again, who knows? But yes, Newman Arms. So question number 2, the Black Robe, or the U3, is also known as what? Batman, you've been saying the answer already throughout the quiz, so I'm sure you know it.
Santa.
Rombie, did you know?
Yeah, Passanta.
STARS TyranT?
Passanta.
Is. Very good. Nice points all round. Question number 3 was, what is the largest case you can buy in Remake 4? So looking for some numbers. Batman?
16 by 24.
16 by 24. STARS TyranT?
I went 16 by 32. It was a pure guess.
Rombie?
It's 9 by 13.
Congratulations, Rombie. Absolutely spot on to the number.
I had to count in my head. I remember it being 9 down, and I was like, it's longer than, I think it's 13.
9 by 13 is absolute. Well done. Very good.
Thank you.
Question number 4 is, what is the name of the doll in Resident Evil Village where you get the head and the body? Rombie, continue your fine streak.
I thought it was Madeline, but I'm not confident about that. I'm going with Madeline.
STARS TyranT?
Madalena.
Oh, Batman?
I honestly didn't know. Sorry.
Rob, you've been absolute. I would have given you that. But
Can I pull a George Trevor and go, can I get half a point? No, I don't care.
STARS came in an absolute.
I would give that. Come on, I would give that.
Madalena
it's one
is.
letter. Come on, that's recollection.
Fine. Look, we're being generous tonight. There we go.
Hey.
Madalena was the correct answer. Well, remember both of you.
Pronunciation. It might, it might be a silent A anyway.
That's true. Especially in Village, it's all silent at the end, isn't it? Dimitrescu. There we go.
I might have said it wrong, in fact.
Thanks,
Question
Sean.
number 5. What are the 3 animal keys that are available in Wild Things? Stars, did you know this one?
Lion, elephant, eagle.
Okay. Rombie?
No idea. Outbreak's the ones that I don't play, so I have no recollection of this at all.
Batman, did you know?
Pretty sure it's lion key and elephant key, and I've absolutely no idea what the other one is. I'm going to say alligator key.
It fucking is, bastard! Fuck!
It is lion, elephant, and alligator key.
I knew it. As soon as you said it, I'm feeling myself.
Awesome. I honestly couldn't remember the alligator one. I just thought, well, it makes sense because you fight Gnaw or whatever. No.
It is Gnaw, yeah.
No.
Oh,
that has made me angry.
They're the enemies you fight,
hasn't
isn't
ruined
it?
me enough tonight. That's ended me.
Well,
I'm not even going to do the goodbyes. Good night. It's goodbye from me, STARS TyranT. Yeah, cheers. Yeah.
Let's have a look at those. What a close
fucking
quiz!
alligator.
This week's joint winners with 3 out of 5. It's Batman and Rombie there. Well done, 3 out of 5. And
I'm only joint because of Sean, so really Sean should be also a joint winner this week.
Sean, with 2.5, the alligator would have made it a win all round.
Nick.
We're all
Yes.
winners, 100%, 100%. So there we go. Join us next time, and we'll have some more questions. Oh, brilliant. So we are wrapping up, therefore, our review of Separate Ways. I hope everyone has enjoyed it. Coming up next, as teased multiple times now, we are looking at our Remake Reflections podcast, which is very much in line of what we've been doing this evening as well. So that's going to be a deep dive into all of the remakes, including RE1, and just trying to evaluate exactly where we're at with these games and in terms of the lore, overall positioning from a business point of view, where's it going to end, if any, that kind of thing. But and of course, we're going to have some answers from Sean's poll.
All I would say is bring your chosen poison because the answers will shock you.
There we go. What a tease! So, thank you everyone for listening. Hope you have enjoyed it. On that note, it is goodbye from me, Neptune.
Goodbye from me, Batman.
Goodbye from me, STARS TyranT.
And goodbye from me, Rombie.